This video is sponsored by DJ The Lazy Gamer and Crimson Manifesto. Hello, welcome to the full story compilation of the original 6-part What If Goku Was Sent to Planet Vampa series. As voted by those who saw the poll in the community tab, I'll be leaving the series mostly intact other than trimming out the intros and outros where necessary. However, if you keep an eye out, you will notice a few notes, as well as some director's cuts around the finale part. Speaking of the finale, I will actually be leaving that video in its entirety, as number 1, it wasn't really seen by that many people, and number 2, it has a lot of important credits and shoutouts in it. Among those, I also want to start out by giving a lot of credit and love to DragonGarrow Lee, the creator of the Dragon Ball Sai and Super Vegeta Den fan mangas, as both are really large contributing factors to so much of this series, as it's sought to be somewhat of a successor to those in certain ways. I'll be linking to a video my good pal Mondo did covering both the original run of both fan manga, and following links made by him, you'll also find a continuation / redraw effort being headed by Dragon Ball Guy 75. Aside from this, please go ahead and do the usual YouTube stuff of liking, commenting your thoughts, and subscribing. And without further ado, please enjoy the show.
This what if was suggested by user Ronnie on top on one of my community posts, so make sure you're paying attention to the community tab so you don't miss important news and updates. Now, to make this premise work, I want to make one major change to the timeline, and that major change is Paragus and Bardock are old friends. When Bardock was a bit younger, he had served in the same planet raid squad as Paragus, and because of this, he actually impressed the older Saiyan, causing him to take him under his wing. Because of this, Bardock was influenced to also hold an amount of disrespect for King Vegeta, but he served faithfully as Paragus did. And he is also taught the ins and outs of Saiyan politics and military life, who to speak to, who to be friends with, things that give him a leg up on the competition. Fast forward a couple years, and Bardock is promoted and now leads his own raid team, now being considered a Saiyan elite himself. But in age 732, King Vegeta has his first child, along with Paragus having his son, Broly, and even Bardock having his first child, Raditz, who in this timeline would be born much stronger. A while later, we would still get the introduction of Frieza as the new Emperor of the Universe, as King Cold steps down from the position, and King Vegeta still has the discovery of Broly, where he still reacts in the exact same way, with fear, for his sovereignty and for the safety of the Saiyans. Once Paragus hears of Broly's exile, he races out to find Bardock, wanting to at the very least have the backup of a Saiyan he trusted. He explains the situation to his friend, but Bardock sadly declines. He explains that he just wasn't willing to leave Guinea behind like that. Not to mention his son Raditz was still here on planet Vegeta, and he couldn't just abandon him as well. And as a father who feels a sense of loyalty towards his own son, Paragus at least understands that part of the situation. But Bardock, knowing how dangerous Vampa was, tells Guinea to load Paragus up with as much food and water as she could, so he'd have some rations. Hopefully, Paragus could communicate with Bardock somehow, and they could all plan a rescue mission when the time is right. Paragus thanks his friend for what he was able to do, and sets off. He goes through the exact same thing he does in canon, and steals a scout ship. Though in this timeline, you could argue that Beats wouldn't follow Paragus into the ship, because it took extra time to stop and speak to Bardock. But I'm actually going to leave that to still happen. So the two make their way to Vampa, and everything there goes virtually the same. The only change I'm going to make is that Paragus will not kill Beats. He does this for 2 reasons. Number 1, if Bardock ever did come to help, having an engineer on the planet who could repair any damage to the ship he arrived in would be invaluable. Number 2, because of how much he has come to trust Bardock in this timeline, Paragus is a lot more merciful and decides against killing him. There's also the factor of all the food that Guinea had sent him with, as well as Broly showing that you could eat the bugs on the planet. But for now, the trio of Saiyans is stranded on Vampa. Over the next 5 years, we see Paragus has taken to making Broly train in preparation for his revenge, even deciding to help Beats toughen up some so that he could kill his own Vampa beetles and secure his own food. The trio learn the ways of the world and become adept at surviving there, learning what times of day it was best to train or sleep or eat, getting used to scarfing down the beats for food, and growing stronger in general. But finally, one day, the same day that Broly had lost his first friend Ba to be exact, the boy is off by himself, angry at his father of what he had done, and petting the severed ear around his waist. A while later though, Beats is actually able to find Broly, as the two had developed a sort of big brother and little brother relationship over the last 5 years. The lanky older Saiyan tries to comfort his younger friend, explaining that his father just wanted Broly to focus on his training and get strong. He even offered to try and help mend the relationship between Broly and his pet. But then, interrupting their conversation, they see 2 Saiyan pods entering the atmosphere and rush back to get Paragus. This is what they've been waiting for the last 5 years. The trio later returns to the crash site and open up the first pod, finding it to be full of supplies. Paragus and the others were confused by this, but assumed that Bardock was in the other pod. When they open it up though, they do not see Bardock, but his mini-me. With the young Saiyan boy was a hologram message, and on it was Bardock. In the message, he began to explain everything that had been happening on planet Vegeta since Paragus had left. From the gathering of the Saiyans by Frieza and his suspicions of this gathering, all the way to telling him that his other son Raditz was currently working with Prince Vegeta. Bardock ends his message by saying that he's betting everything on Paragus, even Kakarot's life. If he didn't arrive within a year, then he should assume that Bardock was right and try to escape Vampa on his own. Paragus plays the message back a few times, running the entire situation through his mind. But he finally sighs and told Beats to help him get the pods back to their cave, and grabs Kakarot by his tail, rendering him unconscious before telling Broly to carry him. The group returns home, happy to have food other than Vampa beetles, but are dissatisfied with their new obligation to remain on the planet longer. Back on planet Vegeta, the plan to eradicate the Saiyans still takes place, but I want to make one small change here. Because Bardock is a Saiyan elite, I'm going to say that he has access not only to the Powerball technique, but also full control in his Zara form. See, in the Broly movie, we see that Bardock has some battle damage before Frieza destroys planet Vegeta, so it's implied that he had been fighting someone beforehand. So in this timeline, we see a Great Ape Bardock running through Frieza's soldiers in the atmosphere above planet Vegeta, before Frieza destroys him and the planet in one blast. And trust me, the Tyrant remembers this. Back on Vampa, we see that Paragus continues Broly's training, making the boy grow in strength at a much faster pace than what he should for a child his age. Seeing this, Kakarot also wants to get stronger and do some training of his own. It's just natural instinct for him to want to do so. That said, I don't think Paragus would have much interest in training Kakarot. The only use he could have is another sparring partner for Broly, but he was still too weak to be much worth in that sense. So instead, he has Beats train the kid. That way they could both keep busy and Beats could grow stronger as well as Kakarot. Their days go along just like this, with very little deviation from that schedule, and notably, Kakarot does get stronger over time. His voracious appetite forces him to take on the bugs on Vampa, and sometimes he bits off a bit more than he can chew, so he'd have to get saved and probably get a Zenkai boost with that. Not to mention, being Kakarot, he would probably want to challenge Broly in some type of way, which again would make him grow stronger just by training with a very strong opponent. But finally, their year passes, and with no sign of Bardock, they realize he just wasn't coming. With a small group of Saiyans only able to assume that Planet Vegeta had indeed been destroyed by Frieza, Beats grows incredibly sad and depressed hearing of the destruction of his home. While Broly and Kakarot, on the other hand, really have no memory of their planet, so there isn't much context on what they should be sad about. While Paragus is slowly but surely being consumed by his thirst for vengeance. He just grows angry and bitter as he's under the impression that King Vegeta and his offspring have all died. With his last ambition in life snuffed out, Paragus orders Beast to help him start stripping the 3 Saiyan pods on their planet for parts, and hopefully they can repair the main floater on the ship they arrived in. Meanwhile, he would slow down on Broly's training. If there is no Vegeta or King Vegeta, there is no reason to push the boy so hard. With Paragus showing this leeway, Broly actually gets to be a kid for the first time in his life, and we would also see he and Kakarot truly befriend each other. The 2 young Saiyans would train and play together, and Broly could even try to introduce Kakarot to Ba, who probably wouldn't fully accept Saiyans ever again, but can learn to tolerate them. Paragus, though disapproving of this behavior, decides to focus on leaving Vampa instead of telling Broly what to do. Now the rebuilding of their ship is going to take a little while, so let's move back to what's happening with the Frieza forces. Remember Bardock's fight with them? Well, that news forces Frieza to take harsher actions against the remaining Saiyan underlings he has. That said, Frieza is no fool. He's a savvy businessman, so he decides to put them into much more dangerous missions than in canon, the next ones always being more dangerous than the last. This way, the Saiyans could serve their purpose of conquering planets, but also possibly get killed in one of these dangerous missions. Because of this, the 2 unnamed Saiyans that are in Vegeta's crew die on one of these harsh missions, and we are left with our 3 main Saiyans, Vegeta, Raditz, and Nappa. Remember, having a stronger Raditz with controlled Ozara form would be helpful in keeping them all alive, but they're all hurt very badly in their latest mission. But they are taken back to a Frieza planet and put in healing tanks, and gain a Zenkai boost from being so near death. But as soon as they are fully healed, the 3 are approached with another mission. When they see the average power level of its inhabitants are nearly twice that of the last planet, they decide that Frieza must have it out for them. Granted, Frieza was aware of the Saiyan ability to come back stronger after near-death experiences, but this was a mission suitable for the Ginyu Force, and not them. It was slowly becoming clearer and clearer that Frieza was deliberately trying to get them killed in one of these missions. Prince Vegeta, at the tender age of 9, is already in control of this group. Trying to think of a way for them to not die in this next mission, he questions Raditz, asking about something he said a while ago, about having a brother that might have survived. If this were true, and there is a possibility that he was alive, then Raditz would need to go get him and bring him here for this next mission. The other Saiyan wholeheartedly agrees, and sets off towards the repugnant planet Vampa. Now let's get to when Raditz actually arrives on the planet, because I don't think his journey will be any longer than 2 or 3 months. He searches the planet with his scouter and pinpoints a cluster of notably strong power levels, and flies there, finding 4 Saiyans instead of 1. One of which recognizes him as the other son of Bardock, Paragus. Recognizing Raditz tells Paragus to tell the story of his past to Bardock, which makes Raditz a lot more trusting of him from the start, and afterwards, the young Saiyan explains the situation with Frieza, assigning harder and harder missions for the remaining Saiyans. This causes Paragus to comment on the fact that Bardock was suspicious that Frieza might betray the Saiyans, and this was further evidence of that fact. When Raditz finally mentions that Prince Vegeta was currently the leader of their three-man team, the fire of revenge is reignited in Paragus. Now, I had considered having Paragus have a change of heart in this timeline, but I honestly couldn't think of any real influence that would make him do so. Bardock himself was influenced by Paragus to dislike the royal family. Beast, to our knowledge, feels no amazing loyalty towards the royal blood, and Kakarot is way too young and hasn't been through the events which allow him to change people's hearts as he does in canon. And Broly is just a loyal soldier, so I don't see him contradicting his father. So, with the new goal in mind, Paragus and Beats take the floater from all 4 Saiyan pods on the planet and are able to finally construct a new main floater for their main ship. This allows the entire group to escape Vampa finally. And again, we'll skip back to when they actually meet the other Saiyans. Once meeting back up with Vegeta and Nappa, they're surprised to see how many Saiyans Raditz had brought back, 4 times what they expected. But this could only be helpful. The group are all briefed on the mission, and remember, this would actually be the first combat mission for Beats, Kakarot, and Broly. But again, with this being a planet suitable for the Ginyu Force to take over, the Saiyans actually have to resort to the Ozaru form right off the bat here. That said, Broly's tail was removed in canon, yes, but it seems that when Saiyans are younger, they can regrow their tails multiple times, so I'll be giving Broly back his tail for this moment. Paragus is wary to let Broly use his Ozaru form in this fight, but pulls him aside and tells him to stay close to Prince Vegeta. Hopefully in his rampage he would accidentally harm him, but Broly just obeys his father. The Saiyans look up at the moon and the raid begins, with Beats, Kakarot, and Broly being completely out of control in their Ozaru forms, with the former of the two having a bit of trouble with the stronger inhabitants of the planet. Vegeta, Paragus, and Nappa, as well as Raditz, being the control combatants, are able to strategically attack the places of great importance to the planet. And around Vegeta would be Broly, doing way more damage than what he actually needed to do. Vegeta, seeing the destruction and realizing they wouldn't be able to get a good price for the planet if he kept this up, tries to put a stop to it, but this causes the two massive beasts to get into a battle. The two Great Apes begin to fight and wrestle ferociously, devastating the forces surrounding them. Vegeta had the edge in power at first, but Broly was slowly growing angrier and stronger. A hazy green energy began to flow around him, and slowly but surely began to overtake Vegeta in terms of power. He's finally able to get the upper hand and wail on Vegeta, beating him down into the ground and creating a large crater around them through all the dirt and debris they kicked up. Vegeta, though barely conscious, was amazed at the power that Broly held, and maintained enough sense to reach out with all his might and tear his tail away, before they both passed out. They both begin to return to their human forms and are lost inside the rubble and destruction they had caused as they shrank back down. Hours later, the invasion is deemed a success, as Broly and Vegeta's skirmish seem to have destroyed the majority of the opposing forces. Afterwards, the Saiyans rest up and try to search for the missing Vegeta and Broly, but are unable to locate them. With the search deemed a failure, Kakarot grows very sad to think that his first friend had lost his life in the battle, and even feels guilty as he was the weaker of the two, yet had been the one to survive. He took some solace in the fact that Beats also mirrored his emotions, but it actually angers him that Paragus doesn't seem to be too torn up about losing his own son. As for the others, Raditz, like Nappa, had grown to really respect Vegeta as a comrade. Because he isn't a weakling in this timeline, he wasn't treated too poorly. In fact, he was treated very well, so it's actually a very sad loss for him. That said, you could not call Vegeta his friend, so it's not a debilitating loss. Nappa is hit a bit more heavily by the loss, as Vegeta was his responsibility. But I think now he would take the role of the mentor of the entire group. The big brute of a Saiyan shows some tenderness as he notices Kakarot's sadness. He calls the child to him and teaches him of an old Saiyan custom. He tears a white cloth away from the clothing of one of the defeated enemies and soaks it in the blood come from one of Kakarot's larger wounds before tying it around his head and telling him that his comrades would tell him his tears are on the becoming of a Saiyan and to keep moving forward. With that, the tired and injured group return to their ship and leave the planet, reporting the mission as a success. After the mission, Frieza is pleasantly surprised. The Saiyans had successfully conquered a planet that was slated for the Ginyu Force. While that spoke highly of their usefulness, it still bothered him somewhat. Regardless, it'd be foolish to throw them away now, so he'd allow them to serve under him for a while longer, as their own elite force led by Nappa, the Nappa Force. That said, he would keep a very close eye on them and monitor their power increases and their loyalty. But one day, the Emperor would eradicate them too, and with them gone, there would never be any challenge to his power whatsoever. Yes, they hadn't died, but merely been unconscious under tons of rubble. The two young Saiyans are finally starting to dig their way out, enough to see the light and smell the fresh air. It had been a few hours since they had woken up, which was maybe a day or so since the raid had taken place.
The two hadn't spoken to each other much, other than Vegeta raging at Broly for getting them into this situation, and Broly quietly working on escaping. Finally, the two push a massive rock off the pile and free themselves, looking around to see absolutely no one around. The two decide to start a search from the air as their scouters had been destroyed in Broly's rampage. This proved fruitless, however, as they couldn't even find the ship they had arrived in. They'd been left. This realization pisses Vegeta off, while Broly was convinced that Kakarot or his father would not leave him behind. Before they can really think of a next move, however, they see a large number of attack pods landing on the planet. They fly towards the crash site, relieved that the other Saiyans had returned for them, though those that stepped out of the pods were Frieza Force, but they were not Saiyans. Vegeta greeted them with his usual bravado and ordered them to send for 2 more attack pods so that they could leave, but the soldiers just laughed and raised their blasters towards them.
Lord Frieza officially sent us here for cleanup efforts to get this planet ready for its buyers. But he told us there'd be a bonus hint for us if we found the body of Prince Vegeta and brought it to him. Looks like we have some work to do, boys.
Vegeta and Broly glance at each other, unimpressed, and simultaneously lift their hands, blasting the soldier to oblivion. They were tired, but not too tired. Only around 70% of their total power at the moment. The remaining 4 warriors then took this as their chance to charge the boys, splitting up between the two. Vegeta could fight one-on-one pretty well, but with the flurry of attacks on from 2 opponents combined with his own fatigue, he was slowly losing ground and taking on even more damage. Broly was having similar issues, but thankfully, every time he'd miss an attack or be interrupted from finishing off an opponent, he'd grow angrier and angrier, and his power would raise by tiny increments. But he was also being pushed back little by little. Finally, a soldier is smart enough to grab Vegeta's tail. I realize in canon, Nappa demonstrates a resistance to this, but I don't think it's far-fetched to theorize that Vegeta's resistance would either be building up or nowhere near the amount he needs to be completely immune to it. As a result, the 2 soldiers able to immobilize him by grabbing his tail and begin to wail down on him. With it looking more and more like Vegeta was going to die, one of the soldiers, realizing that the others were having trouble with Broly, flies over to help. Through swollen eyes and haggard breathing, Vegeta looks up at his opponent, watching as he prepares a final blow. But to both his and his opponent's shock, a scaly blue hand slashes through the soldier's neck, ending his life right there on the spot. The figure spins and blasts the soldier flying towards Broly, giving them the same fate. Broly finally grows angry enough and roars out as he's able to injure one of his opponents enough to follow up with a killing blow. The other soldier met a similar fate soon afterwards. Vegeta looked up to his savior, tiredly, thinking one thing before he passed out. Knasen. Later, Vegeta wakes up to a small fire built in front of him, and Broly eating next to him, even offering him a bit of food when he realized he's awake. Across from the fire was the adult Knasen that had saved them. He looked at Vegeta just suspiciously as Vegeta looked at him, and began to speak. My name is Tulo. I was a warrior who protected Kanasa, but you monsters came. The tone was bitter and full of hate, but it begged the question, why save them? My people have the unique ability of premonitions. We're able to see into the future somewhat. It's difficult to control, but once you've trained in it, it is a powerful tool. I foresaw you marauders months ago, and trained the capable men of the planet to fight you, while our women and children fled to a safer planet. I thought my people would live on, but I've had another vision. The man you served in doing this would come back again and again, destroying us to sell our home over and over. The cycle wouldn't stop. As for why I saved you, the 2 of you have more potential than I've ever seen in my life, both in terms of power and in terms of changing the future. Vegeta couldn't help but boast at having his own power recognized, even though by a weaker race, while Broly's mind was too worried for his family to take pride in that. Join me. We can save my family, yours, and dethrone your master. As you've just seen, he has no loyalty towards you, so why have any towards him? Vegeta was hesitant. He'd rather set out on his own and cultivate his strength before getting revenge on Frieza. It was hard enough dealing with the quiet Broly as a lackey, even though he didn't really follow orders very well. And training with a weaker race seemed like a waste of time to him. While Broly, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. If you'll help me save Dad and the others, I'll do whatever you like. Vegeta grumbles at his meaningless rebellion, but decides he'd better go along with the 2 and gain whatever little increase in strength Tulo's training would provide. It'd also give him more time to figure out how to make that power Broly held his own. So with that done, the 3 finished their meal and stealed the Frieza Force pods still on the planet, reprogramming them from a new destination and flying off. But we're actually going to have a bit of a time skip from here on out. Actually, a very big one. 9 years in fact. And we return to see what has happened with the Saiyans still under Frieza's rule. The most notable change happens with Kakarot. He's been training since the day he lost Broly. At first, trying to reach a level comparable to Broly, and soon after that, just wanting to get stronger for the survival of his team, so as not to lose anyone else ever again. I kinda based this version of Kakarot off the version of Kakarot and DragonGarrow Lee's Super Vegeta series. Keep in mind, that version with no training from actual masters like in canon went from power level of around whatever he was as a kid to being able to defeat a version of Vegeta that was estimated to be over 20,000. So training for him is pretty beneficial, and I'll link that story's author in the description. One way of Kakarot training would be to challenge Nappa, who was all too happy to give the boy some harsh training before throwing him into a healing chamber. He'd also get busy sometimes, so this would mean that he'd have to give Kakarot another way to train while he did things. Remember, he's now the leader of the Nappa Force. So he'd begin setting Kakarot up against multiple Cybermen in large training bouts, which wouldn't satisfy the boy's lust for more power. So, because of this, Nappa begins to cultivate and breed stronger and stronger strains of Cybermen. If the Cybermen from the original timeline were equal to or a little bit stronger than Raditz, then these Cybermen, by the time Nappa has pushed them to their limit, they are a little over twice as strong as that. The Cybermen also became very good aids during battle, since the team could grow in number at any given moment. We could even have Beats design a machine that can spread the Cybermen across a planet before the attack even begins. And side note, I honestly just scared myself with the idea of the end of your world kind of starting with a Cybermen invasion. It's kind of creepy. But getting back on topic, meanwhile, Frieza had slowed down on sending the team on extremely dangerous missions. He'd gotten rid of Vegeta, who had been the strongest of the Saiyans, so at this point it made no sense to put the group in a position to power up even more from Zenkai boosts. Unfortunately for the Saiyans, Kakarot's growth in resemblance to Bardock, remember, he was a Saiyan elite that fought against Frieza as a Great Ape before the Saiyans were wiped out. This reignites Frieza's nervousness at the Saiyans' growing power, so to cull this, he sends Dodoria and his squad to the planet the Saiyans had just recently conquered, directly after the battle when they'd be nice and tired and ripe for the picking. But he's beyond surprised and angered when the next day Kakarot and the rest of the Nappa Force enter his throne room and regretfully inform him that Dodoria had sought to betray Lord Frieza. In truth, he just begged for his life and offered to assist the Saiyans before Kakarot and the others killed him. Now, Frieza could have just wiped out the Saiyans here and now. By the way the Saiyans acted, Dodoria had told them why he was sent to attack them, especially Kakarot, who had no poker face whatsoever and was full on snarling at the Emperor. Remember, Kakarot had been sent to Vampa with a message for Paragus, detailing Bardock's fears about Frieza's betrayal. They never had concrete evidence until now, so it's kinda hard for the young kid to stay calm. Frieza was literally just about to do away with the Saiyans when Paragus spoke up. He asked if he could speak to Frieza without the other Saiyans around. This confused everyone, but Frieza didn't care. He speaks to the Saiyan one-on-one to get his little fears out of the way before going on and killing the others and him as well. Once the others leave, Paragus cuts directly to the chase. Yes, the Saiyans currently knew Frieza had ordered Dodoria to make a move against them and wipe them out, but he had a proposition. Now this intrigues Frieza, as it is a Saiyan using his head and not his hands, so to speak, though he's being a bit too overconfident. Paragus goes on to explain himself. If Frieza were to wipe out the Saiyans, he'd lose a group that was almost as profitable to him as the Ginyu Force, so it'd be a waste to kill them. Instead, Frieza just needed to soothe the savage beast, so to speak. If Frieza promoted Paragus to Dodoria's former position, then it would show the Saiyans that Frieza was loyal to them, and it would make Dodoria seem less credible, especially since Paragus was weaker than Dodoria. It would show some good faith. In return for this, the Emperor would receive greater loyalty from what would soon become his most effective squad. The Galactic Emperor actually ponders this. It wasn't exactly a bad deal. Promote one monkey and receive better loyalty from the rest. There was also the fact that Paragus seemed to be quick to sell the others of his race, so he could easily become a spy if he needed it. Frieza accepts this offer and calls the other Saiyans back into the room. He then sincerely apologizes about that mean old Dodoria. He didn't realize his hatred for the Saiyans had been that potent, and to drag his good name through the mud, how dreadful. The Saiyans don't believe a word of this, but when Frieza announces Paragus' promotion, they are shocked. The Nappa Force accept Frieza's apology, and afterwards, the Saiyans leave. Kakarot speaks to Nappa and Raditz, explaining they'll all need to keep an eye on both Paragus and Frieza from now on, since Frieza had showed his true colors, and Paragus seemed to be acting in his own self-interest. As for Beats, well, he wasn't 100% sure where his loyalty lay,
but for now, he could trust these two. On the other side of the galaxy, we catch back up with a fully grown Vegeta and Broly. The two in tandem with Tulo have been training and amassing allies for the coming revolution. Both have grown immensely in power, and under Tulo's guidance, have been attacking Frieza-controlled planets while concealing their identity. He explained that keeping their faces hidden would allow them the element of surprise, and it would make sure their fellow Saiyans were not suspects under Frieza's rule. Now, Vegeta and Broly aren't really close per se. They're loyal to each other, but it's more just being allies, more akin to Vegeta and Piccolo's relationship in canon than anything else. Broly had even revealed that Paragus ordered him to attack Vegeta, but the prince admits he pretty much figured that out. Paragus was pretty hostile towards him when they met, and Broly wasn't even supposed to be attacking Kanasa in the same location as him anyway. In the end, he'd assumed Broly was just too stupid to plan it on his own, and decided to just make him his personal lackey. Yeah, he's pretty much still on the idea that he's Broly's boss for some reason. The entire rebellion had grown, but nowhere near the size it needed to be to take on the Empire. Now, Vegeta still fancied himself the leader of their little band of rebels, but it was really Tulo who leads everyone, with Broly and Vegeta being very close to generals or admirals in a way. Though Vegeta has calmed down a bit, he's gotten much more powerful and been exposed to a lot of different races in the rebel army, including an older Yardratian by the name of Hushu, who had taught he and Broly a few little tricks. Tulo's ability to see into the future had made him an excellent leader, and great at planning attacks, but his recent vision was very troubling. He foresaw the young Kakarot Broly had spoken to him about attacking and being killed by Frieza. This concerned him, as the boy had been valued as a powerful ally in the coming war. But the timeline changed soon after, and Kakarot was fine, just training against Cyberman like he always did. Still, this was a problem. If he was willing to do it in one branch, it was possible that he might do it in another. He calls Broly into his room and assigns him a special mission. Hearing the details of said mission, the usually stoic and calm Broly actually gets excited. He suits up in Frieza Force gear, even putting on a helmet to conceal his identity. With his disguise in place, the large Saiyan employs two of the tricks he'd learned in the rebellion. First, he suppressed his power to about the average Frieza soldier's power level. Then, he put two fingers on his head, sensed out Kakarot's power, and disappeared. While Kakarot is training, a random Frieza soldier just appears in the room, interrupting him. Before Kakarot can threaten him to leave, the soldier lifts his hands and blasts a camera that is monitoring the room and the lock to the door, trapping them both inside. Kakarot takes this as a threat and attacks the soldier, but he shows a lot of skill in dodging the young Saiyan's blows, even tripping him up a few times and making him hit his head. Remember, Broly can't unleash his full power because it raised too many questions. Broly decides to end the fight here and now and grabs Kakarot's tail, but he's shocked when he resisted and he's actually able to land a kick on the face and knock Broly's helmet off, even giving him a bloody nose. Broly groans, but chuckles. "Not bad, little brother, you've gotten strong." With that, Kakarot is finally able to recognize the older man. As unsane-like as it is, the kid actually gets very emotional. Remember, Kakarot isn't the typical Saiyan. Even with the upbringing of this timeline, the people in his family are usually very sympathetic and emotional. Plus, he's still technically a kid and dealing with all the emotions of one, so it'd be a pretty tearful reunion. Once Broly is able to calm Kakarot down, he tells him everything that's been going on with Rebellion, and from now on that he needs to be the perfect Frieza Force soldier. The rebels have a plan, and he can't break off from them. Broly then grabs the younger Saiyan by the hand, remembering what Tulo had ordered. "If you gauge the boy to be worthy of it, teach him, show him how to conceal his power. He'd continue to grow stronger and avoid Frieza's ire. He'd also be a man on the inside for us to take advantage of, if he can move around undetected." Broly and Kakarot are then transported to a distant planet, and Broly asks Kakarot if he would like to fight, exciting the younger Saiyan. There, he unleashes his full power, and this shocks Kakarot. They have a fun battle with Broly's surprise at Kakarot's sheer determination to keep fighting. Even when completely outmatched, he thought of some really off-the-wall strategies that really helped him out in battle. He ends the fight early, only because he didn't have a lot of time, so he had to teach Kakarot how to control and sense his ki. It takes a bit, but once he sees that Kakarot has a feel for it, he takes him back to the Frieza Force base in the training room, which still hadn't been opened. The two say goodbye, and Broly plans to come back and see him again, and keep him updated on what their plans are, and maybe even show him some more tricks. Kakarot waves him off, and once he's gone, he blasts the door to their training room open, shocking the soldiers who were still trying to open it. He was beat up, but grinning like a maniac, and soon passed out.
Later in the healing tank, Kakarot couldn't stop smiling. It has been 3 years since our story left off, and the Nappa Forest have just returned from another fairly simple mission. Harder missions were rare for the team now. It was evident that Frieza wanted to minimize the chance for them getting Zenkais, and he would always have the team's power read after such missions. It wasn't desirable for them to grow any stronger, but neither was squandering profits. The constant shifting between meaningless slaughter with no real challenge and actual limit-breaking battle was taking a toll on the Saiyan psyches. Things have been rough since Kakarot's reunion with Broly. Questions were asked about the incident in the training room, and a culprit for the mysterious soldier who appeared in the room was never found. Frieza had been very displeased about this, and had personally interrogated Kakarot with a good bit of quote-unquote forced coercion, so to speak. Even so, the Saiyan maintained he had no idea who the attacker was, and repeatedly pledged his loyalty to Frieza between bellowing and pain. Finally, Frieza relents and dismisses his subordinate, who somehow still showed proper respect. That was fun at the very least, but there was still an issue here. This event came to be known as the first instance of rebel activity directly towards a Frieza force, and the fact that it took place involving a Saiyan sadly increased the prejudice that they would face, made worse by that Saiyan being Kakarot, whose father was a known and infamous rebel, so to speak, before the modern day resistance even formed. In a galaxy-wide address to all his soldiers and clients, Frieza made it very clear this behavior would not be tolerated, and he would use the full weight of the Frieza force to prove that point. Even so, Kakarot had attempted to do as Broly asked of him, become a perfect soldier for Frieza, a perfect murderer, a monkey on a leash. He'd even encouraged his teammates to do the same with little more than a vague promise of it all being part of a greater plan. One day they'd make their move, but for now, they'd play the hand dealt to them, and even stuck in that small statured state, still, his brother and companions had grown to trust and respect Kakarot, though sticking together did them little good. Through gritted teeth, Kakarot and the Saiyans made it through 3 years of ever-maddening treatment, especially since the rebel activity was only increasing. Frieza had lost a small amount of planets on the outer rim of his reach, and reconquering those wasn't an issue, but unless Frieza himself stayed on the planet, it amounted to a loss of resources and men for a meaningless cause. The insolence of this group did not match the size of it, and slowly but surely, the hits he took became greater and greater due to the losses. It was a simple fact that his elites were not meant to make up the majority of his forces. So, he's decided to deploy the Ginyu Force to a planet that he's purposely painted as a prime target for rebel takeover, and he is sure that this would likely end this charade. But his own inclination towards cutting down Kakarot's pride only fed more into his growing concern, feeling a cycle worse than before. This is why once again after completion of their mission, the Nappa Force is called directly in front of Frieza and his primary lapdogs, Zarbon and Paragus. All kinds of questions are lobbed at the new leader of the team, Kakarot. Not a role bestowed upon him as a reward, but instead to better keep an eye on him. Kneeling in front of the Emperor of the Universe with the other members of his team behind him, Kakarot is asked once again whether their skies were destroyed against weaker opponents. He apologizes but reminds Lord Frieza that Saiyans aren't the gentlest. Frieza then asks why this is the third mission in a row in which there was a bit more force than necessary, resulting in damages that brought down the overall value of the planet. Kakarot again apologizes but reminds it's hard to hold back against such weak planets. He humbly suggests that Frieza start allowing them to operate in smaller teams when on such assignments. Frieza was less than pleased with the pseudo-respect. Kakarot had slowly begun to have issues showing the real thing. But amused at the Saiyan's sharp tongue, Zarbon pipes up at how surly Kakarot always was behind that loyal soldier stick he attempted to put up. In reality, he was nothing more than a snarling beast like his father. The veins on the foreheads of Raditz and Kakarot throbbed a bit, but they were used to such remarks. Still, it was disgraceful to allow their father to be mocked by a crony of Frieza like Zarbon. Bardock would be turning in his grave according to Raditz. The remark brought Frieza's good mood back. He even thought of a fun jab he could take as well. He attempts to recall Bardock's name, not letting on that he hadn't been able to forget it, but he plays coy regardless. With so much pressure and tension, the Space Camel's back broke. Eyes widening in rage, Kakarot couldn't hold himself back anymore. He first reminded Zarbon of his place under him with a right hook that spins the alien around and sends him into a wall now cold. Kakarot's furious gaze then shot to Frieza, and over a decade's worth of anger saw its opportunity to explode out. Raditz and the others shouted at him to stop as he flew directly towards Frieza, only for a slight glare from his oppressor to erect a barrier of sonic force that his power couldn't bulldoze through. He is repelled and sent bouncing back, and is knocked out cold himself, now sporting a large gash on his forehead. Frieza coldly orders the rest of the Saiyans to get out of his sight. The Saiyans scramble to do so. Raditz and Nappa scoop up their comrade and leader and book it. As he leaves, Beats spares a few moments to look over his shoulder at Paragus, who vacantly meets his gaze. Frieza merely inhales, and the lanky Saiyan falls behind the others fearfully. Completely ignoring Zarbon as he slowly comes to, Frieza asks Paragus what the reading of Kakarot's power was in that outburst. His Saiyan lieutenant replies that it was only marginally higher than his last reading, a measly 42,500. And so, pleased with his efforts, Frieza decides to celebrate a good day of business. Kakarot is put in a healing tank. In the soothing liquid, his mind is finally able to attain a more peaceful state and allow more clarity of thought for the first time in ever, possibly. Sadly, those thoughts were largely negative. Today had been nothing but a reminder of his station as a slave. Broly hadn't been back to see him, and he hadn't heard from him. The Saiyans were never told firsthand of rebel attacks, and the rebel army used commandeered Frieza Force gear to hide their identities. He didn't know where Broly was. In truth, the rebels were a faction of ghosts left in Frieza's wake. He, Raditz, Nappa, and Beats, they die like this. While he wallowed, Kakarot could just barely pick up on a faint and unclear voice. He didn't hear this voice with his ears though. It was almost as if the sound was in his head. He focused on it and became clearer and clearer and familiar. His name. He heard his name called. And then, his consciousness made a connection. Opening eyes in his mind, Broly appeared in front of Kakarot after yet another long stint away. He even spared a joke at Kakarot finally hitting a growth spurt, but Kakarot seemed nearly soulless right now. No energy in his greeting or happiness at the reunion. It occurs to Broly the weight that he's asked his younger brother to bear, and he asks for a debrief of the situation. A bit of fear creeps up that Kakarot isn't the man for the job. Sighing, Kakarot gives a quick and aloof rundown, ending up to date with him nearly getting himself killed in something so pitiful he couldn't call it a fight. Slowly his anger began to burn away his apathy, and sympathizing, Broly stayed quiet and let Kakarot calm himself a bit, and then he spoke again. He tells the younger Saiyan that the rebels are ready to move out, but Kakarot shows a bit of hesitation and wants to know the finer details of the plan, because the way things are now, he doesn't see them winning this war. Tulo said the same thing more or less. That's why we're done with potshots. We've got the giant kneeling, so to speak, so our fangs can finally reach its throat. Hours after Kakarot had been placed in his healing tank that night, Frieza is interrupted from his leisure as Zarbon is forced to barge in on his lord and inform him of grave news. The Ginyu Force has been defeated by rebels. Paused by the news, Frieza's face was one of shock, before slowly twisting into rage. Blinded by it, he actually harmed Zarbon by simply flying too fast through the windows in his own personal quarters. His destination was the planet that he set up to be a trap for the rebels, and he was too angry to even spare a thought to his underlings' well-being as Zarbon scrambled to flee the room before being sucked into a vacuum, terrified for his own life. Frieza, with all his power, was heading directly towards where Broly and his regiment of rebels were. Those of them that could sense Ki would soon feel the power approaching, even though it was still a good distance away. But they did not interrupt Broly's meditation. They had complete faith that he would get them out of there in time. Back in the mental meeting, Broly explains that if they can mount a huge offensive, the rebel cause will gain even greater momentum. Then, with an all-out assault of the Code family, using all their firepower, all their tech, all the support they have, then it truly might be possible to free the universe. Kakarot asked to know when they plan to do this. He'd have to come up with a way to properly take on Frieza himself, and he definitely needed more power. But Broly assures that they've got him covered, with some good backup and a hell of a training partner. Kakarot then asks who other than Broly would be worthwhile backup. We jump to a planet far in the galaxy, but under the control of Frieza nonetheless. Alarms blare in a base as another attack by the rebels has been launched. The two co-commanders of this particular base, Abo and his brother Kato, angrily rush their underlings into battle. One such underling, a young Saiyan by the name of Tarble, reluctantly joined the battle as well against the attacking rebels. This was scary because it was hard to use a scouter against them, and the rebels weren't known for fighting honorably and out in the open. They obscured the battlefield with dust clouds and explosives, used their stolen Frieza Force armor to infiltrate the ranks and cause friendly fire, and he'd even heard rumor they had heavy hitters capable of destroying planets. That wariness though led to the coming invasion being spotted thanks to miscommunication with a few incoming ships with a now outdated security code due to Frieza's stricter mandates. But the end result was just a firefight of ki blasts and primitive trench warfare. The majority of Frieza's forces at the base is gathered outside to face the threat, and there were already men put down in the skirmish. It angered Tarble. Most Frieza soldiers were scum, but these underhanded tactics and just being on the side of Frieza rubbed him the wrong way. All he wanted was to meet a nice girl and settle down on a quiet planet, a mute dream if he died a dog of war. Invigorated, Tarble powers up, and a few of the soldiers around him look warily, noting that he is much stronger than them even for a Saiyan. Still unaware where the enemy actually is, he yells for his comrades to move their lord to the Empire, and begins to rain down a barrage of large ki blasts in the direction of the enemy forces, halting their position and causing many of the enemy soldiers lacking in-road combat training to dive out of the way or retreat. Before long, the entire opposition had backed out of Tarble's range, and the Saiyan grew a bit tired and was left having expended himself a good bit. From inside one of the rebel ships, the feeling of Tarble's ki gets the attention of the leader of this brigade. Vegeta stands, relieved that there was one opponent strong enough to toy with. To keep his identity hidden, he dons a helmet and sets out, barking at his men for being weak slackers and ordering them to stay back and let him show them how to do this. The Frieza soldiers scramble to get a power reading on him, and seeing them do so, Vegeta can't help but flare his power from min to max in a short instant. Numbers exceeding the 100,000 mark flash on all their scouters before they finally burst. The majority of Frieza's men then cower in front of an opponent on the Ginyu level, and Tarble looks around. Once again, he finds himself having a Saiyan-like reaction and aversion to their cowardice. They are fighting for their lives here. If they had to go down, then go down fighting.
Once again with a boost of hot emotion, his power skyrockets and he guns directly for the opponent. Vegeta is unimpressed with the straightforward attack to the point that he doesn't even look at Tarble long enough to recognize him. Simply, he powers up to allow his own ki to repel the weaker warrior, and he smirks behind his helmet at the sight of it. Tarble, however, stops on a dime right before he smacks into the pseudo barrier and points with 2 fingers directly toward Vegeta's head. A pocket-sized orb of ki appeared inside Vegeta's helmet right before his eyes, and he recognized it as a technique extremely similar to his dirty fireworks. Though with some ease, he rids himself of the helmet and races behind Tarble as the attack detonates, seemingly taking him with it. Tarble was in the right to look happy after the attack. To a lesser opponent, the surprise in close range would have probably been deadly, if not a deadly distraction. But he then felt a chill as a familiar voice spoke out behind him. His eyes widened and he spins to face his brother for the first time in years, but a chop to the neck caused him to fall unconscious. With too much going on, Vegeta doesn't really have time for the reunion at the moment. He then yells out to the surrounding Frieza soldiers, who in turn were surrounded by rebel forces now. He tells them to surrender and live. Smart men join their cause, and dumb ones pay their debt to society another way. While the soldiers recognized themselves no match for the Saiyan, they definitely feared Frieza more, and they jeered the Prince of all Saiyans, who rolled his eyes and mumbled that Tulo couldn't say he didn't try at least. Besides, he'd found Tarble. That was good enough recruiting for one day. The Ardratian rebel Hushu then appeared next to Vegeta and chided him, bringing up his rivalry with Broly. Vegeta waves him off and gets back on topic. He asks if they found Abo and Kata. He could feel their ki in the base, but he didn't want to blow the entire thing away in case there was anything useful inside. But then, the 2 elite power levels disappeared, and it was almost as if Frieza himself had defied logic and replaced them, and hidden his own ki to ambush the rebels instead. Collectively, fear ran up the rebel army's spines, as a large purple Frieza soldier emerged from the base in rage. Hushu curses while his student gets even more excited about fighting, and the 2 of them speculate on the origin of this attacker. But with a solid guess on it, Vegeta activated his favorite skill taught to him by Hushu. He was one for originality, and didn't like being on equal footing with Broly at all. It was why he'd refused to learn a few techniques that Broly had, but when Hushu offered to teach him Spirit Fusion, Vegeta saw it as a possible super technique. And so, he rushed to the Purple Warrior, even with a massive disparity in power, and he dodges just enough to land one single strike, which actually splits the creature back into individual parts of Abo and Kato, both looking completely bewildered and confused. Vegeta's cold smirk towards the 2 of them was their last sight, as Vegeta with a double dirty fireworks blew their minds and dropped them both to the ground. Calling back out to the Frieza soldiers, who had been cheering until now, he asked if they're sure whose side they want to be on. And a few soldiers do change sides, but the majority do not. As grim as it is, playing by Pyro rules, the remaining enemies are put down and the base is ransacked, with Vegeta in quite a happy mood. He goes to take Tarble back to the ship and get him up to speed sooner rather than later. It was better not to put this off for too long. Kakarot's first peaceful sleep in years is interrupted as his healing tank is drained by a scientist accompanied by Paragus of all people. His mood is ruined instantly, and he steps out of the healing tank as Paragus gives him a mission briefing. He details classified information that Kakarot is currently one of the only higher ranked soldiers remaining. The Ginyu Force and 2 more of Frieza's higher level warriors have been defeated by rebels. Thankfully, Kakarot's poker face has improved. In service of Lord Frieza, and to spare him working too hard, Paragus has suggested that Kakarot take the Nappa Force and get them prepared to lead their own teams. Despite their treatment, they've proven themselves loyal as a whole. The apologetics were easy to see through for Kakarot, and it disgusted him how Paragus became pitiful after Broly and Vegeta were gone. He was just content with bootlicking to stay alive, and it seemed like some misguided sense of kinship between Paragus, Kakarot, and even Beats made him force it onto them as well. Paragus would then inform Kakarot of a pretty impromptu guest on his little training mission, and Kakarot growls at having Zarbon obviously set spy on them, but does not voice any issue with it. All of this was fairly convenient actually, and he chalked it up to this being the result of the actions that Broly alluded to, but is surprised that his plan worked so well. He begins to get dressed as Paragus details more and more, and finally notices the new scar on his forehead in the reflection against something shiny. Luckily, he still had the ceremonial headband that Nappa had prepared for him when he thought Broly was gone. He stopped wearing it, but held on to it, and now he had a use for it again. Paragus notices him equipping it, but decides to say nothing about it. He then issues Kakarot a new and apparently more sturdy scouter, and explains that he had convinced Lord Frieza to equip his elites with brand new models. He also tells Kakarot to keep being a good soldier. His reward was coming, but Kakarot simply ignored this. From there, he left, and inconspicuously uses his still somewhat shaky ability to sense ki to track the other Saiyans to the mess hall, and travels there to inform them of the news. Happy that he's alive, the Saiyans obviously tease him a bit before he reminds them why he's the leader, and actually cracks a small smile for a bit. He then decides to go over a bit of the classified info he'd been told, simply holding the new scouter in his hand to try and muffle the sound as much as possible. Raditz and Nappa are somewhat excited for the training trip, but Beats is still not really happy with his life as a warrior, and sinks lower in his seat, and focuses on stuffing his face for now. Kakarot then remembers one more thing that Broly said last night. Kakarot calls out to Beats and holds up his scouter, and asks if he can do anything about their little bug problem. The engineer's curiosity and tinkering ability is sparked, and he answers that he has an idea and wants to try something. Kakarot nods and tells him to pull out whatever stops he needs to. Anybody who has a problem with it can come take it up with him.
Happily, Beats goes for more food. Kakarot then uses his head again and asks Nappa to bring a Cyberman with him as well. They could also be pretty helpful. And he warns him about the final member of their little excursion. Soon enough, the group set off and are tortured by having to endure Zarbon's jokes and jabs at their expense from his attack ball. He likely knew the Saiyans would get their payback during the training, so an assault of insults now would be best. He'd by no means forgiven that brutish ape for striking his elegance, and this time he'd be ready to go all out. Surprisingly though, Kakarot didn't participate in the War of Words this time. He stayed silent and never responded at all actually, even as his brother did, and it only made Zarbon talk more. Across the galaxy, and returning to their home base, Vegeta and his crew of rebels report to the command. They detailed their attack on Planet Frieza YSG-8 was a success. General Tulo congratulates him for a good job and the reconnection of his family, but warns him not to get too comfortable, as he has a special mission planned out just for him. Vegeta gets excited and asks what's next, but that adrenaline comes crashing down when Tulo fills him in that he'll be training Kakarot and the other Saiyans under Frieza's rule. He's also ordering him to take Tarba along with him. Vegeta flat out refuses the order, but Tulo vetoes this, and simply states that Broly is going to be indisposed. He needs to continue his training and meditation and tame his rage. Tulo still believes that above all else, that may be their secret weapon. Vegeta grumbles at once again being reminded that he isn't necessarily in charge. It was still somewhat bitter to accept Broly may be the legendary Super Saiyan. In the end, it was the only conclusion they could give to the power he'd begun to manifest since losing his tail and learning to better control his ki and emotions. But he refused to allow the score to lay like this forever, which is why he's somewhat hesitant to waste his time training with Kakarot and the Saiyans. He attempts to interrogate Tulo if he'd seen anything in the future about Kakarot being special as well, but he is not very satisfied with the answer. Vegeta begrudgingly tells Tarba to prepare himself to head out, and Tulo instructs Hushu on the planet that Kakarot was heading to, and the line of allies that could use to planet hop and travel there themselves. Admittedly, Tarba was very hesitant to be around Saiyans again. Not to mention, he wasn't very comfortable with this drastic change of his life from mundane and boring to grand and high stakes. Meanwhile, the Nappa Force and Zarbon landed their destination, and riled up from the nearly constant insults, Raditz and Zarbon charged out their attack balls and began duking it out right then and there. The two of them were actually decently close to even. Kakarot and the others climb out of their own pod, and the team leader immediately begins trying to feel for the ki of his incoming trainer, but his brother and Zarbon were making it hard to focus. He even attempted to keep himself calm per Broly's advice. He'd explained how that meditation thing worked, and how it was especially beneficial for ki usage. Relaxing and calming down was the key apparently. Easier said than done though, and because of such, he hauled off and hit both of them. He then asks Beats if he was able to do what he asked of him, and the engineer nods and holds up a small remote and explains that he can dampen the long-range transmitters in their scouters. Nodding at this, he takes his scouter off and throws it away, and tells Raditz to handle his business before leaving to have a look around. While he is searching, finally Vegeta and Tarbo arrive, escorted by Hushu. The surprise appearance combined with Kakarot always being on edge nearly started a fight, but Hushu successfully mediated peace, even when Vegeta greeted Kakarot with bravado, and made him once again disappointed to not be able to train with Broly. Hushu tells Vegeta that he'll stay stationed somewhere nearby in case he's needed before departing himself. The former prince tells Kakarot to lead him back to the other Saiyans, and Kakarot begrudgingly does so. While flying back, Tarbo works up the courage to introduce himself. Kakarot doesn't care. A power in the distance spikes up, and the trio arrive back to the Saiyan campsite where they witness Zarbon having transformed and gotten the upper hand on Raditz, putting the long-haired Saiyan on his last legs and under Zarbon's boot, as the monstrous mercenary goads Nappa and the other Saiyans to try him as well. Vegeta facepalms, having his fears all but confirmed. But Kakarot disappeared from beside him, and next is Zarbon. This time around, he struck out with a backhand that sent the brute skating back. Raditz gripes up at his baby brother, saying that he had Zarbon on the ropes, and Kakarot partakes in their usual and strange way of showing brotherly love by stomping on his brother's sternum and accusing him of slacking off too damn much. It would be more comedic and lighthearted than it sounds since they're both Saiyans and raised like it in this timeline. Zarbon sweat drops to this, having already recovered, and roars for Kakarot's attention. He reminds the fool that he hadn't just sat still after these monkeys emerged to Doria, and with its transformation he could... The scouter beat and activated as he looked at Kakarot. After he addressed his team, Kakarot's power level began to climb rapidly from the usual state he maintained it at. A bit of catharsis was felt as Kakarot let loose for the first time in his life. He could hear Zarbon ramble off the numbers, 50,000, 60,000, until stopping at 76,000, far above Zarbon. Cowardice overwhelmed his pride, as Zarbon stammered that he didn't actually mean anything by it, and that he could tell them things and be useful to them. Kakarot simply brings his hands up and jabs at the air a few times. With a delay, soaring fist of compressed air came rocketing at Zarbon and struck his face, chest, and stomach repeatedly. Still toying around with his full capabilities, Kakarot proceeded to outspeed Zarbon and hit him back and forth until the alien finally lost consciousness from being treated like a rubber ball. Disappointed with the low-quality workout, Kakarot charges a ki blast at the tip of his closed fist, but surprisingly, Vegeta appears next to him and crushes the blast in his palm. He laughs and tells Kakarot to cool his jets. Having one of Frieza's top men alive may lead to beneficial info. After they got their hands on it, then they could blow his head off. The other Saiyans are shocked to see Vegeta here and alive. Nappa gets so excited that he runs over and slaps Vegeta over his back, proclaiming that he knew the prince couldn't be killed so easily. As if he'd actually missed Nappa, Vegeta doesn't instantly cave his skull in, and returns with a greeting before he yells out for his brother to come down as well. A bit nervously and still shaken up with the massive uprooting of his life, the younger brother decides to face his fears. He lands, and Nappa gives a confused look to see Vegeta with the castaway prince. Taking Kakarot's example of Saiyan behavior, the smaller warrior takes a deep breath and roars out that his name is Tarble. Got a problem with him? Well, he doesn't care. Confused by the strange outburst, nearly all the Saiyans laugh, except Kakarot for being copied, and Vegeta for being embarrassed. And with Nappa having matured more and still acting as the mentor of the group, he actually welcomes the younger Saiyan home. Tarble is pretty touched by it, uninterested with oohing and awing over each other. Vegeta glances down at his palm and notices that Kakarot had left a few burn marks on his glove, surprisingly making him a bit more invested. He gets everyone's attention and details why he's here and what the plan is, while Kakarot reveals that he was in on this. Holding up the headband he wore and pointing to the scar on his forehead, he declares that today they begin training to take back their freedom. Vegeta agrees, and as such, orders Kakarot to fight him right here, right now. That meditation stuff was all well and good, but nothing beats bitter battle as training. And he was going to make use of these losers and show Broly up. Kakarot couldn't agree more and accepted the challenge. And so, in an all-out battle, he and Vegeta set the standard for the training to come. Surprised at everything Kakarot had to bring to the fight, Vegeta is forced to reveal himself as nearly twice as strong as Kakarot. Though in terms of sheer battle experience, Kakarot seems to have had the advantage on him, and drew on some iron will and refusal to quit that pushed him forward, and Vegeta nearly to his limits. The match was finally called when Zarbon began to wake up. Vegeta conducted the interrogation of the cowardly turncoat, and made him elaborate on the claims he made earlier, the information he promised. Zarbon actually showed full disloyalty, much more afraid of dying now than of a threat not currently in front of him. And so he blabbers on multiple things, some of which were already known, but some, like Frieza's ability to transform, being proven, and what the actual numerical value of his power level is, are useful. Satisfied, Vegeta decides he'll allow Kakarot the choice of if he kills Zarbon or not, but he does mention that he could be a good pawn to help train some of the weaker Saiyans, while the two of them focus on their own training. Being in the rebel forces has made Vegeta more aware of the advantages and disadvantages of having allies. And Kakarot actually likes the idea of bossing Zarbon around for a little while, and decides to allow him to live for the time being. But he does make it clear, one step out of line, and he's space dust. The routine was set. Vegeta and Kakarot usually spar hard, and once they push themselves to the limit, they'd focus on training with the others. Many a time during the week of training, Kakarot attempts to quiet his mind and meditate, but having to go so far away or wait until nightfall, combined with his, as stated, muddled mind, didn't allow for it. To make matters worse, or possibly better, Tarble seemed to have latched on to Kakarot as a friend of some kind. Maybe their ages being so close, or copying him getting him the warm reception the other day, but the kid would show a lot of unsane-like behavior around Kakarot, complimenting him during the spars, bringing him food sometimes, even asking him for a few tips in fighting. Kakarot found it strange and annoying at first, but was slowly starting to find it endearing. Tarble would even join Kakarot in meditation training one day, and Vegeta had to give him a joint lesson, but Tarble actually boasted a much easier time with the technique, picking it up fully within a few days, and discovering a benefit from the training of mind and body. Vegeta would actually congratulate him, and mention something about spirit control training as the next step, and in his own way he tried to console Kakarot, reminding him that they were true-born elites after all. He just had to work harder at it. Curiously, Zarbon had also gone through a bit of a small change, thanks somewhat in part to Vegeta and Kakarot's power, along with their mercy. His preconceptions with Saiyans really weren't matching up with reality right now. He'd thrown himself wholeheartedly into the training he'd been forced into, and worked hard, because if not, he expected he wouldn't survive very long. There was also the inescapable fact of Saiyan power and potential in front of him right now. It made sense that Lord Frieza did what he did in a strategic view in face of that truth. But nonetheless, they'd always be the underdogs against Frieza. They all were. Zarbon himself only noticed this change in perception when Kakarot had mentioned something was different about him. He wasn't worrying so much about his appearance now. He'd actually stayed his true form for a very long time. He'd assumed it so many times in front of the Saiyans, who never seemed to care what he looked like. They only seemed to care about fighting a strong opponent. They wanted to get stronger. So did he at some point. It was hard not to while watching these 8 warriors. This all culminates with the deal being struck. When they return to HQ and heal, Zarbon can sneak away before the fighting begins, but he has to keep his mouth shut about it. Since he was unable to complete his meditation training, Kakarot still takes full use of the sparring partner known as Vegeta, and when he couldn't, he'd go back to the old-fashioned training he used to do, ramped up to an extreme degree. According to Reddit, even Bardock was a fan of simple exercises like push-ups and sit-ups, and thankfully Nappa had cultivated an even stronger strain of Cybermen. Vegeta was in fact so impressed he actually asked for a few, citing that these guys could do wonders in the rebel forces. But finally the week is up, and the return order will be sent out. The Nappa Force and Zarbon board their attack balls, while Vegeta and Tarble meet up with Hushu for their portion of the plan. The trip will likely take a short time, but during it, Broly and his squadron are preparing for their prong of the attack, the ambush on King Cold. Having spent so much time training and meditating to find control of his anger, Broly is ready to do this. Sadly, he hadn't been able to contact Vegeta or Kakarot due to his training being so intense, but he believed in them wholeheartedly. But for right now, he and his men had to keep a cool head as they infiltrated the planet King Cold's ship was currently on. Back at the Frieza planet, the Saiyans and Zarbon are sent to the healing tanks to fix them up of any damage. Hours later, Paragus arrives and scans through their power levels, and is adequately pleased with the results. These would all be decent power levels for new elites, but Frieza had directly ordered him to interrupt Kakarot's nap so he could report to him early. Following the demand, he retrieves the younger Saiyan who was pretty unhappy that he couldn't talk to Broly before the battle even then. Still, he holds on to the last thing Broly told him. His attempt to give him faith came off a bit cheesy and overdramatic, but even so, Kakarot took some solace in it. While they walk, Paragus praises Kakarot on a job well done. He even compliments Kakarot's sense in not training himself and increasing his own power level too much, explaining it was the best way to keep heat off himself. Reporting to Frieza, the two Saiyans kneel before him, and Paragus reports the results of Kakarot's mission. Frieza is also pleased by this, as well as the falling amount of rebel activity over the last week. It seems showing his face struck fear as it should have, and so Frieza himself genuinely praised Kakarot for his work and loyalty. And Kakarot accepted it? It seemed the emotionless statement from the Saiyan revolutionary was the signal to the rebel forces. Simultaneously, the rebel band of Vegeta and many others of the rebel forces listening on the conversation with stolen scouters set upon the planet in ships and stolen attack balls. Openly and without deception, a full-scale frontal attack had been launched at the Frieza Force's headquarters while Frieza was there. Alarms inside the base blared, and Frieza's pleasant grin was wiped off his face as he saw Kakarot's morph into a smirk. A strange sound, and the sight of a purple glow behind his chair was the last thing Frieza saw before Tarbo unleashed his Gallic gun directly on Frieza's back, knocking him out of his chair. Having been transported into the room along with him by Hushu, Nappa, Raditz, and even the usually non-combative Beats, dogpiled and began to ruthlessly beat down on Frieza as a collective, giving him no real reprieve even as the blows as a whole did little more than scuff Frieza. Nappa had even somehow snuck a few Cybermen with him, and the evil gremlins did little more to add to the nuisance. It was when Kakarot joined into the assault that Frieza began to have the most trouble and felt a bit of sting. Paragus, seeing the madness, attempted to dive at Kakarot and get him off, but the scarred Saiyan transitioned from stomping on his oppressor's face to using it as a springboard and kicking Paragus away, only to drop his knee onto Frieza's face. Groaning, Paragus reprimanded the foolish and rebellious behavior, and Kakarot spat back at him. But then, Frieza spoke up with a chilling amount of ease. With a strange ki-infused whistle of sorts, Frieza created a storm that blew the Saiyans and Hushu up and off of him, cutting and burning them in its winds, before bursting and flinging them all out into the corners of the room and into the walls. Now groaning himself, but thankful that his hair had cushioned the blow, Raditz asked what the hell had happened. The plan was, with all of them together, they should have been able to, but Kakarot explained for him. It was because Vegeta had ditched them, and Kakarot would bet his life that he was going to fight with Broly. Across the universe, in the hangar Broly and his forces are currently hiding in, waiting to spring their surprise attack. Vegeta appears suddenly and woozily drops to his knees, being terrible at the technique of instant transmission, coupled with doing his own simultaneously when Hushu activated his. It was a pretty difficult thing to pull off, so was locking on to a solid power level that he could recognize as a rebel's. Broly curiously and angrily asked Vegeta what the hell he was doing here, and what about the others, but Vegeta just waves him off, explaining that he wasn't going to sit out a fight with King Cold. A familiar voice broke out from the rebel crowd. Tulo was here as well, a commander willing to fight with his soldiers in what was truly the most important battle of their lifetime. He explains that looking at the future will not solve anything right now. If Vegeta has trust in the Saiyans, they must trust Vegeta. As for right now, he's honored to fight alongside Vegeta and Broly. Still focused on his goal, Broly is a small bit worried. He simply closes his eyes and attempts to send all his hope to Kakarot. The entire universe was in dire need of it. Back in the battle against Frieza, as the rebels take on his soldiers outside, Kakarot and his men have all but fallen. They've all been brought to their knees and beaten within an inch of their lives by now. Even Hushu had been struck while dodging and helping his comrades to transport around the room. Frieza wanted to make examples out of them and was dragging this out. Paragus rejoined his master at his side and kneeled before him. He apologizes and accepts that he was unable to carve loyal soldiers out of the Saiyans. Frieza also seemed disappointed as opposed to gleeful, but he was certainly not tolerating such insolence any longer. The Emperor stepped forward to do just that when Paragus had attached some sort of metal collar to Frieza's neck. Confused, the Emperor turned to question him, but Paragus simply held up his own remote and pressed down on a button on it. Pure lightning shot through Frieza and actually forced him to his knees. The Saiyans looked on bewildered as Paragus revealed himself as a double agent. He'd originally thought of this design as a form of discipline for someone like Broly, but he'd realized he could make it lethal if he'd only had the right parts and access to them. Being one of Frieza's underlings gave him that. The Emperor still struggles to move a bit as Paragus explains the rebel who came to see Kakarot was his son Broly, and he'd come to see Paragus as well. He was actually quite shocked to hear that Prince Vegeta and now apparently his cowardly brother were fighting to free the universe. But apparently Bardock had told him to expect much stranger, but he was also cut off, as Frieza is finally sick of hearing his explanation. And even through the pain, he uses his power to simply split Paragus in half at the waist with his arm. The Saiyan nearly goes into shock and endures excruciating pain as he attempts to get the remote for the collar out of his hand so Frieza can't destroy it. As the Emperor begins to move more and more easily, obviously adjusting to the electricity, Frieza gloats that he never fully trusts the Saiyan. But again, the sentence is not able to be finished, as Nappa, like the other Saiyans, had regained his strength enough to stand for a round 2. He latched onto Frieza in a tight full Nelson, and enduring the pain of the electricity still running through Frieza, and feeling it way worse than he did, barked out to Paragus. He reconciles that Paragus might not be so bad after all, and admits to feeling his own age on him as well. At this point, he can only really see one way of serving their goal. Right here, right now, he offers to accompany Paragus to hell. Though on the verge of death, the old Saiyan beamed a bloody smile and slid the remote to beats, dragging his body to Frieza's feet. As the Emperor almost escaped Nappa's grip, he latches onto him, and Nappa orders the others to retreat away. The two Saiyans of the older generation then proceed to unleash all of their ki, leaving their bodies stone husks weighing down Frieza, and hopefully dealing a final blow to him in that weakened state. The explosion was admittedly smaller than the two had likely hoped for, but they couldn't be blamed for it. They were both in very bad shape. Though in the end, it only really served to destroy the collar on Frieza's neck, freeing him of the electricity and pissing him off more than anything else. With quiet, contemptuous fury, he decides that he'll reward their insolence by allowing them to be one of the few to experience the terror of his next form. With the collar destroyed and no other options, the Saiyans push down the loss of Nappa, and to an extent, Paragus as well. They're very aware they had to give it one last try to survive this, while Frieza is trying to transform. Kakarot and the remainders of his forces attempt to attack again, but sadly, the transformation couldn't buy them the time they needed to directly take down Frieza. Everyone began dying in front of Kakarot. Hushu, dodging and jumping around with instant transmission, was eventually predicted. Frieza simply outstretched a hand for him to impale himself on as he appeared. Beach doing his best and giving it his all, but never a fighter, was simply hit with a wave of the palm, an explosion of ki, and afterwards, he was no longer there. Raditz died defending his baby brother and was impaled on Frieza's horns. And Tarble, a scared child more or less, tried to get away from Frieza and huddled close to Kakarot, nearly having a breakdown. Admittedly, so was Kakarot. His mind was even more chaotic than ever, and he just couldn't think. There was so much rage, so much sadness, so much death. He finally came to the conclusion that Broly was wrong. The universe didn't have any light. Frieza continued to stalk closer to them, enjoying the pitiful sight of the two, and Kakarot began to cry along with Tarble. Why weren't there any heroes? Why was he never good enough? Why did they have to live like this? Frieza reached out towards Kakarot and removed his headband. He wanted to see the scar he left one last time before he put down the rabid dog. But Kakarot's hand shot out and took hold of his oversized wrist, squeezing down hard on it and confusing the Emperor. As the ground began to shake, Kakarot began to vent his frustrations with the world, his frustrations with Frieza. He hated that Frieza could just be born into a position of power the way he was, and never train a day in his life for it. Kakarot's hair began to stand on end, as he did as well. An eerie green energy began to leak out of him, and his eyes changed and hardened, even though they were full of tears. His grip increased tenfold, and seemed to quintuple after that, as the green burst into bright gold, and a light was born to the universe. Unaware of where this wellspring of energy came from, Kakarot didn't dwell on it. Instead, he bet everything on unleashing all his and the universe's rage on Frieza. He would finally teach him fear for once in his life. He orders Tarble to leave while he can and tell the rebels to destroy the planet. He then yanks Frieza's much taller body down and shoots his other arm up in the prettiest uppercut you'd ever see, knocking his former oppressor away, shocking Frieza even further. This was impossible! Tarble attempted to argue, but Kakarot only threatened him and told him to leave again. Left alone with just his fallen allies and Frieza, Kakarot is elated for this chance for payback. Tarble flew as fast as he could out of the base, taking out any Frieza soldiers in his way and rushing outside while dodging ki blasts. Finding the strongest rebel he could, one strong enough to reasonably detonate a planet core, he reluctantly parrots the order that Kakarot gave him, while also trying to find someone brave enough to try and go back for him. Meanwhile, over where he was, Broly's invasion had already begun. In his perfectly controlled Ikari form, he'd already begun wreaking havoc with Vegeta and the others, storming towards the throne room and going straight for cold. Inside, the dictator awaits the rebellion's final stand against him, deciding to deal with things in a hands-on manner rather than destroying the planet and wasting resources. As he waited for the doors to open, he was especially shocked when Broly suddenly burst in, using instant transmission in front of him. And then, using arthritic gigantification, he expanded himself and drove his fist directly into Cold, burying him in the floor of his throne room. Cold, though much stronger, was put into a more deadly situation than Frieza, or so they thought. The rebels with Kakarot had already completed their attack with the planet's core and began to evacuate. Inside the slowly collapsing Frieza base, Kakarot had shut down Frieza's attempts to transform again. His anger and vitriol transcended his need to test himself this time. There'd be plenty of time for that later on, but his own clock of the situation forces him to go for the wrap-up. Holding both fists out in front of him, he orders Frieza to defend himself and releases his own creation of a blast in his strong red light. Frieza attempts to fight back with a simple single-handed ki blast of his own, pushing all his might into it in a bid for survival. But Kakarot's next words put a chill down his spine this time. With his signature beam almost doubling in strength, red ate away at purple, and Frieza lost a large portion of what made up his own torso and the wall of his base behind his back, exposing the now hellish landscape of the former luxurious planet he dwelled on. Finally, he flopped into the ground and struggled to continue breathing. Simultaneously, the golden power finally runs out for Kakarot, and he as well drops to his knees. He only had about a minute left now. At least, he'd taken Frieza down with him. But pain flashes through him as a small beam pierces his own torso. Frieza had leaned up, even in what should have been his last moments, and fired off a death beam, declaring that he will never be defeated by a filthy, stupid Satan. But he is interrupted one last time as a ship crashed through the other wall, burying the Emperor under it in rubble as the unstable planet raged and twisted outside. Tarbo pokes his head outside a hatch in the ship and bolts out towards Kakarot, getting Kakarot's arm over his shoulder and getting him inside of it, yelling out to the pilot to get his ass going now. The ship took off, joining the caravan of retreating rebels and cowardly soldiers wise enough to leave. And literally by the skin of the ship's paint job, they escaped the planet's blast. Tarbo does his best to deal with Kakarot's wounds, when of all people, Zarbon charged from the cockpit after hitting the autopilot and began to help Tarbo while exclaiming how scary that was. They do their best and finally get Kakarot stabilized, when a transmission comes through the channel the rebels had been using with their ships. A report from the King Cold ambush. It was a failure, and Cold is still on the loose. Flying aimlessly through space with the still heavily injured and unconscious Kakarot, Zarbon and Tarbo, having never gotten the chance to become close and still having both adrenaline and fear pumping through them, an argument was bound to ensue. Over comms, a mad scramble had started to figure out where they'd regroup to save the quickly fading Kakarot, and more importantly, escape Cold's immediate grasp.
Everyone shut up! We have a few ships in our possession equipped with healing chambers. He'll be alright. No one regrets this outcome more than me. But worrying about Cold now won't help us get out of here with our lives.
Tarbo, for one, very much noticed the change in tone from his elder brother, but was distracted when groaning sounded behind he and Zarbon. The Conqueror of Frieza had awoken and was now struggling to stand up, much to their chagrin, causing Zarbon to scoff and stretch the communicator to the sand while easily forcing him to lay back down in that tired state.
Broly, you there?
He raggedly asked into the communicator and waited as it was quiet for a bit before...
Go ahead, little brother.
Though his Eddie's tone belied the disquiet brewing from recent events.
Let's go home, so we can...
He's out cold,
Zarbon explained as he took the communicator from him. Broly couldn't believe he hadn't thought of that, but he had his mind so preoccupied with the major loss they had just suffered, coupled with the news of his father and the other Saiyan's fate. He picks up the communicator to his mouth once more.
Not a bad idea. Everyone set course for planet Vampa,
The now co-commander ordered before settling in for the trip. Back then, in the throne room of King Cold, Broly, Vegeta, and a handful of above-average rebels who miraculously survived thus far due to having the strongest their army had to offer as backup and the future vision of their commander Tulo. Together, they all continued their attempt at a revolt. He did not have perfect future perception, but Commander Tulo had done a damnably impressive job at explaining to the weaker forces that their role, including his, was that of distraction, to allow their heavy hitters the opportunities they need to land more critical attacks, and hopefully, a decisive one on King Cold. If the tides of battle shifted in his favor, mess up his next move and turn it back. Hit and run tactics to pester and impede Cold as much as possible, and all heightened with the advantage of very often being almost the perfect counter to what he was about to do, and in perfect synchronicity. Something the Cold Tyrant couldn't afford to deal with right now due to the aforementioned trump cards that were the genius elite generals of the rebels, and worse yet, 2 more of those Saiyans his son had wished to wipe out. Prince Vegeta, with his incredible battle prowess, which had only further prospered in putting himself in life-risking battles against fully trained soldiers and elites of the Frieza Force, rather than those that they would attempt to conquer. And worse than him was the controlled and locked-on rage of General Broly, as he fully harnessed and controlled the power of an Uzaru,
even its size at times with help from his favorite Guardian technique, making for truly devastating attacks. And Cold could almost swear he'd begun to take more and more damage as the massive Saiyan seemed to grow stronger and enraged. Far past annoyed, Cold was past the point of caring much for his throne room, especially as the next thing he knew, he had the former Saiyan Prince's feet slamming into the bottom of his jaw and rocketing him up into the massive and crushing hammer fist of Broly that drove him into his own throne room floor. Growling, he simply hugged the floor and could feel his capacity to exert a good bit of force and completely crush it and leave them all to die in the explosion, leaving him the sole survivor, only to be shocked once he feels a hand on his back and is instantly transmissioned by Vegeta to be held above the Saiyan's head, causing him to simply waste a large amount of ki into the open air.
Thanks for the warning, Tulo. He was just about to try it, and I'm getting better at that trick.
Fire!
Tulo commanded as he and the other soldiers grouped up and combined the strongest ki blast they could, which packed a decent wallop after the stacking damage. Cold uncharacteristically growled and looked up, realizing something. That was a Kanasan, a race he remembered Frieza saying he'd had eradicated and sold the planet of. He didn't initially peg him to be that large a threat, but this wasn't the first time this battle a move of his authority with him at the center of it.
So that's it.
You know, I couldn't put my finger on it until just now, but I think I figured out your people's little gift.
We called it a curse.
Tulo responded hatefully as Cold tried a different method. Using telekinesis on one of the many pieces of rubble made throughout the battle, he condensed and sharpened it, before flinging it silently towards the eyes of Broly. At least, this is what Tulo saw as he called out to Broly to move his head, causing the Saiyan to fall short on an attack he had been going for, and instantly and faithfully obey the order, only for Cold to then dastardly swing its tail wildly into Broly's unmentionables, and spin before delivering a harsh back fist to the slightly weaker Vegeta, interrupting his attack as well, and letting him smash roughly into Broly, sending them both sprawling. Tulo, what was that? Moving my head didn't do anything there. Tulo? Broly sat up rubbing his head, and shuddered, now finally seeing where the rubble had hit. It currently stuck out of the wall behind Tulo, who was kneeling while clutching the hole it had made in his chest, and struggling hard not to cough and do more internal damage to himself. Vegeta at this time also took notice, and instantly went to frantically ordering the other rebels to get him back to the ship and into the healing chamber, but Cold cared not for sentimentality, and as soon as he saw an opening, went right for the kill on his second strongest threat, only for Broly's hand to just barely stop the former prince from being gored on the massive horns of King Cold, and sending both Saiyans sliding back slowly from the force. Having already done the same, he orders Vegeta to get a hold of himself and refocus on the battle, as the others can save Tulo while they cover their backs. But by the time he did, he witnessed Cold raising his leg up high before releasing a punch-like kick to the throne room floor, unimpeded this time. This caused a massive boom to crack and split the dome-like structure, allowing the vacuum of space to begin sucking out oxygen before the crack began to splinter and grow. Even King Cold wondered how his full power kick had been impeded, and looked down along with Broly and Vegeta as the ground rumbled and broke apart. Tulo sat there knelt down, with his arms, or what remained of them, having blocked Cold's leg from completing the full arc of his kick.
Oh? You couldn't be an effective distraction, so you chose to be a meat shield. Seems you burnt up all your power and life force just for that. Seeing the future is indeed troublesome for those who aren't worthy of such a gift.
Tulo, though now nearly a corpse, stared up defiantly. Slowly, he began to reach up, as if to pull Cold closer to him to tell him something. The confident monarch sadistically had to hear his last words. Vegeta and Broly stared in shock.
I once feared the idea of your brood wielding this gift, but now I know exactly what you will see. The horror of your end!
Reaching the broken remnant of his hand up, Tulo jabbed the base of Cold's neck, stunning the Mad Emperor and actually causing him to writhe in pain and agony for some reason. As the broken revolutionary fell to the floor, he yelled out while staring to Broly and Vegeta.
Run, my sons!
With the air quickly running thin, Vegeta and Broly couldn't do much worth attacking as much as they wanted to. And so, the Saiyan Prince quaked a bit, as he locked into the nearby key of one of the fleeing rebel ships close outside the slowly exploding planet. With regret, Vegeta accepted this as a defeat, and put his fingers to his head and his other hand on Broly's shoulder. The two then disappeared from the destructing throne room and reappeared inside the soon-to-flee ship, whose pilot was extremely confused, just citing Tulo's last orders for him to wait nearby.
Get us out of here!
Broly awoke as their ship jostled from the fierce turbulence of planet Vampa. Through the communicators, he could hear as other pilots began to struggle through it, and he jumped into action, ordering them all to look for bright patches of green and do their best to land there. All that did successfully were treated to an almost fluffy landing on a near gelatinous-like surface. Broly then quickly got out of his own ship as the ground began to shake, and he flew up to see the familiar landscape of Vampa, and lots of Ba's family members rising up, angry at the harsh blow dealt to them by the fleet of ships. Though Broly did know beforehand they're all fierce and strong enough to be okay afterwards. For now, he needed to make sure they didn't take out their anger on his allies. Going into his Ikari form, he let out a loud bellowing yell that caused bright green sound waves to wash over the creatures and caused them to shine with the same eerie green glow, and seemingly recognize something. They then seemed to sit at attention, staring at him anxiously like domesticated animals seeing their owner, and the Saiyan was very happy to see his idea worked, as he had never tried anything like it.
Did you use spirit control to make animal friends?
More or less. Where's Kakarot?
Vegeta explained that he'd made sure he was placed in a healing tank ASAP and had seemingly stabilized already. Now, they finally had to worry about their next biggest issue. Where was King Cold, and what was his next move? Meanwhile, after having survived the explosion of his favorite retirement planet, Cold had been aimlessly drifting through cold, dark, empty space, racked with visions and images of something. His empire collapsed around him, and then somehow, the exact opposite. He is able to see the standoff Frieza went through, along with the defeat and later death that he suffered when going through a similar planetary explosion in one of his much weaker suppressed forms. He'd been cursed with a Kanasan future sight, and he was perceiving the changes and shifts of many possible futures, and even some happenings of the past, it seemed. He began to notice a pattern, as his sanity and reasoning were anchored through pride alone. The visions of futures that benefited him began to show up less and less frequently, until almost not at all, concerning his already stressed out psyche. Couple this with small glimpses of those Saiyans increasing their strength easily led him to a correct hypothesis. He wagered this meant the odds of the Saiyans winning in the long run were increasing, which made sense. They as a species had a dangerous gift of their own, and if battle made them stronger, then retreating and getting proper medical treatment would definitely increase survival odds, and thus the odds of winning the grander war. Even more so if they continued to do this training thing and increase their own power at such a rate. That seemed to be how this game was to be played, and this revelation gave the old tyrant his confidence back.
Simple. A gamble isn't so intimidating if you can stack the odds in your favor.
Now that Cold had a strategy, any wounds he had currently were superficial. What he needed now was to attempt to salvage whatever of Frieza and his forces he could. From there, he needed to get his head scientist Kikuno and to speak to Berry Blue. It was time to shore up their defenses and go back to recruiting for the Cold Empire. They had not been toppled just yet, only tripped up. Planet Vampa's strange day cycle already made sleep somewhat harsh at the new Rebellion HQ, but the rambunctious sparring matches of the new top brass made it even more so. Kakarot and Broly, since the younger Saiyan had first recovered, had almost endlessly started training together. And they certainly weren't the only ones intensely training in the meantime, as the suspense of waiting on King Cold's next move was a great motivator for some form of training. Things had only gotten more and more crazy since their last major update. The rebels had been very antsy after the first 7 days on the repugnant planet, and the Saiyans all being readily willing to devour the same Vampa beetles that Bob Beast did, also did very little to improve crew morale. Broly's newfound responsibilities had him putting off sparring with a newly healed and Zenkai'd Kakarot, who himself was particularly eager for a challenge and seemingly blind to the prevailing sense of loss permeating throughout the rest of the rebel army. Tarble himself, being saddened by the heavy losses sustained by both fronts, was almost put off by Kakarot's seeming elation at the demise of Frieza by his hands and indifferent to losing his biological brother and all his childhood mentors in one fell swoop. To his surprise, compared to when he'd last seen him when they were children though, Vegeta was his polar opposite. He'd been replaying the events with Tulo again and again in his head, with every mistake and inadequacy becoming more and more ingrained in his memory, something becoming clear. He needed more strength as a leader, as a Saiyan, and to make sure what happened would never come to pass again, putting him, like most of the other rebels, in a very fragile, anxious, and volatile state. And it just so happens that Kakarot's got nothing to do. During Broly's strategy meeting with his subordinates, a job he now realized how easy Tulo made look not only with his future sight, but his wisdom, those in charge of scouting and tracking the Cold Force's movements, those admittedly underqualified to run the healing chamber schedule and general health of their forces, and their contacts throughout the galaxy, are gathered either in person or through communication. But Broly is interrupted and honestly a little embarrassed by loud booms and the shaking of the ground. In the middle of their camp, 2 Saiyans began going at it and causing chaos, while Zarbon, Tarble, and a few other rebels tried to stop them. While this was something Broly had been waiting for, he had hoped it wouldn't take place until much later. There are much larger priorities right now, and from the look of things, this fight had stopped being friendly a long time ago. Vegeta seemed to be using this as an opportunity to release his pent-up frustrations, which of course Kakarot took the opportunity to return in kind, unknowingly tapping into what is recognized as the Super Saiyan form, something that took Vegeta by surprise. He flung his hands up, stopping the transformed Kakarot in its tracks, as he recognized this to be a placating gesture, as Vegeta spoke.
How do I achieve that state? Please tell me!
Kakarot seemed shocked by the question, but his answer to it was casually containing the rest of his punch and slugging Vegeta to the ground while laughing at him. The prince shook off the admittedly subdued blow, but couldn't stop the spark of his own anger at being attacked by an ally in such a way, causing him to burst back to his feet ready to fight again.
Don't you realize how many comrades we've lost? The allies we can never get back while Cold still breathes, and you have the nerve to laugh! Every one of us is struggling to find a way to make that worth something.
Kakarot only gave a cold smirk and gestured to Vegeta to come at him with a clenched fist. All he was thinking about was fighting for the sake of fighting. He wanted to test himself and nothing more. With a boost from Vegeta's rage and creative use of his still growing instant transmission technique and other fighting tech, quickly made up for a good bit of the power difference, and with satisfying blows, he sought to punch the cold-hearted Kakarot, almost as if rejecting his past self in doing so. But Kakarot only responded by no longer holding back and rebuking the sentiment with renewed viciousness.
Cut the sensitive crap, Vegeta. You don't know a damn thing about me. The Nappa Force and I risked our lives with every mission we went on. We all knew what standing up against Frieza meant. Nappa, Raditz, Beats, Paragus, they were bodies to throw at Frieza and they died a death worthy of a Saiyan warrior.
That's enough! If we succumb to infighting now, then every sacrifice would be meaningless, and I will not allow that to happen. Am I understood?
But Kakarot was already walking away, when suddenly,
I still can't believe this ragtag group has taken down Frieza.
the rebels all froze at the sound of an unfamiliar voice in their heads.
Yo, can you all hear me?
The voice introduced itself as King Kai, and as far as they were all concerned, he was sort of the boss of the galaxy. Of course, this all brought up tons of questions. How? Why did Frieza and Cold have such a grip on the galaxy then? How were they speaking? Whose side was he on? And most importantly, why contact them now?
As for that last one, oh, would you get over here, you stick in the mud? You're making my job so much harder. You were supposed to arrive the same day you died, you know.
Everyone is further confused by the new magic voice now arguing with someone they couldn't hear or see, until a familiar voice thought never to be heard again sounded in their heads.
As I've told you countless times now, our assistance is unnecessary. They will handle this.
It was unmistakably the voice of Tulo, and as soon as it was heard, Vegeta and Broly excitedly greeted the supposed ghost of their mentor figure, who lightened his tone to greet all his rebels.
We're speaking now because King Yama and I found out what he did to distract Cold during that battle and save the rest of you.
At the silence, it was clear King Kai wanted Tulo to reveal this. With a heavy sigh, the Kanasan spoke again.
I left King Cold with a gift.
The implication was somehow instantly understood, and of course this is met with shock and scorn. Even the new top brass seemed a bit shaken to know their foe was now that much more deadly, but Vegeta and Broly asked the others not to hold the sacrifice Tulo made for them that gave them a final shot against King Cold against him. The ability to see the future never made them invincible, and it wouldn't do the same for Cold either.
If we could be overwhelmed, the same is and always has been true for Cold.
It's exactly why Frieza feared us. Those legends have haunted them, and now we'll make good on them.
The total morale seemed to waver, while Kakarot seemed to somehow share Tulo and the Saiyan commander's attitude. Budging into the center of the basic huddle the insurgency had made around Broly and the now returned Vegeta, Kakarot again reached out to the power he was beginning to truly grasp and again flashed into the Super Saiyan state.
You're right, seeing the future just means seeing me stand over your corpse. Just give me Cold's location and I'll handle finishing him off all on my own.
I'm afraid that's not possible anymore. He's already gotten far stronger than he was last time, and he's gathering some dangerous allies.
Vegeta then remembered the first lesson Tulo ever taught them.
We can't see the gap in power and waste time wishing to close it. The only way to do so is put resolve in your heart and train.
He almost recited. In the other world, Tulo only smiled and took his arm away from King Kai's shoulder. He knew it was right, and he had prepared them for this. With King Kai's help, the surveillance of King Cold was now child's play, though the signal the deity could get was now experiencing interference, and the hypothesis was that who or whatever Cold was working with had something to do with it. As the top brass had said, training and preparations began in earnest. Those with talents lying solely in combat were first commissioned to rest before attempting to hone their strength further. Lots pushed on by Tulo's mention of training of the afterlife to be with them in spirit, and apparently enjoying a gravity very much like that of Vegeta's homeworld. Eliciting a bit of an idea from the Saiyan Prince, though he realized he'd be hard-pressed to pull it off with his current means. For his own training, he'd pretty much gone back to basic exercise, with the odd sparring with his brother, and the last-minute hero Zarbon. He was reviewing the basis of everything he'd learned up till now, and seeing what small improvements could still be made to them as he bided his time. Apparently, Broly really wanted to put in some personal work with Kakarot before they came together for training again, so for now, he would wait and polish up his own skills. Across the universe, though, a cloaked figure is led through the corridors of a remaining Frieza Force main fleet ship by none other than Berry Blue. The person seemed a tad bit nervous about being here but followed forwards faithfully, as if driven by something. Finally, a single room of the ship is arrived at, and with the opening of the doors, a strange sight is seen. King Cold is sat conscious and suspended in fluid of a healing tank. The strange part was that the battered and broken body of a creature similar to him, that we know as Frieza's second form, is suspended in a healing chamber directly next to his own, though this one is clearly dead. It was a curious sight indeed.
Please enter and relax. I've been wanting to meet you, Great Wizard Bobbity.
The tyrant's speech was somewhat labored in his current state. He could tell the small creature had many questions for him, and so a dialogue began between the two. Cold reveals a few of his cards, number 1 of which being that he can currently see the future, and number 2 of which being he knows exactly what Bobbity wants, and notes that they are probably both aware of how severe his need for competent muscle to back him up would be for his plan, or else the same nuances he currently had to deal with would one day impede him as well. Bobbity on the inside could only celebrate the opportunity. With a pawn such as the old cold tyrant under his control, his quest for Majin Buu would become that much simpler.
Why, of course, my lord. My allegiance belongs to you and you alone from here forth. How may I serve you?
You have a way to further increase my base power, do you not? Do so now. It will make the current process much simpler.
Bobbity blinked in shock at having the exact circumstance he wanted arrived at immediately. He could now make his move unabated and unquestioned.
Para-pa-pa! 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 Para-pa-pa!
Bobbity chanted. King Cold's eyes widened and seemingly blinked as an M mark appeared on his forehead and his healing body seemingly began to do so at a faster pace. Meanwhile, the corpse of Frieza was visibly deteriorating from its tank, and as it did, it visibly began to make Cold look younger.
This is incredible! Lord Cold's vitals are spiking and stabilizing. He is in better condition than the first recovery, and stronger than ever before.
First recovery? Thought Bobbity while looking at the little yellow alien. The other scientist sat on the other side of the room, at a computer, seemingly uninvolved. Then, a grunt from King Cold brought attention back to him as he regained consciousness and looked back to Bobbity with a sinister smirk, mirrored by the little wizard.
Perfect. Now that I have you as a tool, I can awaken Majin Buu.
You control absolutely no one, you little fool. I was fully aware of what your technique would do.
Cold boasted as he began to climb out of the healing chamber, the other tank now also empty. He stalked menacingly towards Bobbity, who scurried backwards and was pinned between the wall and Cold, who leaned down to explain the hierarchy better.
Listen here, I have gathered the greatest scientific mind in my empire. You, the descendant of that foul creature's creator, and this man.
Cold gestured towards the other scientist, who finally stood to reveal himself. It was a being of another nearly extinct race, but one done in not in by the Cold Force, but by the barbaric Saiyans before they had been affiliated with it. A man who'd surely be motivated against Saiyan enemies.
Dr. Mew at your service. My Lord Cold, the designs for my invention are now complete, and I can begin construction extremely quickly with your generous funds. I call it the Big Getty Star. If we can successfully combine Bobbity's magic with Kikuno and I's mechanical genius, the future you foresaw is highly likely.
Cold looked very pleased, and then began to laugh to himself maniacally. He swept a hand out with a flourish, and then gouged it into his own chest, and twisted it to do even more damage, hacking up blood as he did so, and smiling all the way through it to Bobbity's horror and confusion. The wizard questioned what Cold could possibly be thinking as the mad tyrant lifted back up and re-entered the healing chamber before he spoke.
With every augmentation and recovery from severe damage, I grow more powerful. The myth of Super Saiyans is proven to be true in the downfall of my son. And I can tell you for certain the Saiyans are currently devising a way to evolve themselves to a higher height once again. They are a filthy breed that lower themselves to struggling for power they do not deserve. If they find that pursuit so noble, I will sully it and make a mockery of them in the most effortless way possible. I will use every weakness against them and every advantage I can afford myself, and I will crush those that oppose me in every manner possible. Now bow down!
Back on Vampa, Broly and Kakarot were currently training in a very specific way. A very close-range fist fight with no major use of any ki blasts or techniques, just slugging each other.
If you want to learn how to best control your rage, the best thing to do is get hit in a friendly spar and learn how to harness the energy of anger instead of falling prey to it.
He would reason before he would begin raining down hellish blows on the Kakarot, who by this point thought of every way he could to counter the parameters, none of which quite cutting it. Though thankfully, by now going into Super Saiyan was becoming seamless, and the extra power it granted made Broly much easier to deal with. But the training as a whole was still very difficult, and would only get more strenuous as it went on, resulting in many a time for Kakarot's counter blows to slow down and leave him open to harshly be tagged. Or would he attempt to weave away from his older brother's blows slyly, only for Broly to abuse his speed for how much larger he was, and simply shoulder check Kakarot down in a flash. He'd then progress no further and calmly ask Kakarot to stick to the course they'd set, meaning no dodging. This indeed drew a burst of rage out of Kakarot, who grit his teeth and surged at Broly with his fist cocked back for a much too telegraphed haymaker, which Broly actually allowed to slam mostly harmlessly into his nose, though his facial expression remained calm, as if he'd already been ready to allow Kakarot to take some stress out on a punching bag. The thing was, he knew his baby brother needed one that could hit back and had to balance both.
Walk me through the goal of this training one more time. We need to overwhelm Cold,
Broly began to say.
The best way I see to do that is to further increase your power and take advantage of our Saiyan abilities.
Kakarot had long ago pulled his fist back, and the two now stood in front of each other for a breather.
I can imagine a few possible outcomes. Number 1, Vegeta, Tarbal, and I all reach it too. Number 2, only I learn it and somehow figure out how to mix it with my Ikari state. But there's issues with that since Vegeta was never able to, and admittedly he may be more talented than you naturally. And number 3, the thing which I think is the easiest and obvious.
Broly said as he glanced at Kakarot's tail, not unaware that the drooling of not looking up at the moon needlessly was still ever present for his younger brother in Tarbal.
Going Great Ape and trying to stack it with Super Saiyan.
Kakarot recited, now remembering the third possible route to power Broly had thought about. He had at first attempted to introduce a fourth option and allowing him to try and experiment with Super Saiyan itself, and see if it could possibly be pushed further somehow, but Broly quickly reasoned that that may take longer than just teaching it. At any moment, the final battle with King Cold could come, so the quickest methods would be the best right now. After such a review and a clear look at the state that Kakarot was in with their current method, Broly decided to be a bit more heavy-handed and levied an order.
Go ask Tarbal and Vegeta the secret to controlling it.
Kakarot gave an serious look to his older brother figure, about to argue, but the Saiyan's slightly less calm and disappointed expression at his refusal halted him. Remember, though Bardock had grown strong enough to become an elite in this timeline, it's not like that title means Paragus or anyone else in the Nappa Force would have had much time or a legitimate reason to teach Kakarot how to control the Uzara form in the time leading up to now. Frieza didn't want the Nappa Force growing stronger, so if a planet needed the Uzara to take it down, then they wouldn't be deployed to it. Though, he too could realize if he didn't make some kind of move, then not only would he gain no new strength, Broly would be upset with him, and they may just end up dead anyway.
Less trouble to just ask the wannabe prince.
Broly gave a glare at the unnecessary dig towards their comrade while he wasn't even around, causing Kakarot to give a slight flinch and quickly seek out Vegeta's ki to burst into the air in his direction and away from his stern pseudo-family member. During his flight though, it dawned on him somewhat that this was the first time he'd gotten to take a flight around the planet he spent his tender years on by himself and with no one in his ear about war. The nostalgia and atmosphere set his mind at ease, and he took a bit longer than he needed to go and speak to Vegeta, enjoying his freedom and zipping around his old stomping grounds like he never could as a kid, until he felt all the ki of the many rebels. He was beginning to somewhat be able to sense emotions and intent in those emotions, and it sickened him to realize that the cloudy aura of war now permeated and stunk up his once free and rambunctious Vampa. His flight now soured, he finally headed towards Vegeta and his crew with some purpose, arriving extremely quickly obviously. There, he saw the hard-fought spar Vegeta was putting Tarbal and Zarbon through, all while keeping his eyes closed and sensing the attacker's ki rather than using his senses for pinpoint perfect dodging and quick effortless counterattacks, leaving his opponents tuckered out just from not connecting and wasting so much energy, all while Vegeta kept on his toes and bounced around. He took notice of their fatigue and was aware that Kakarot now watched them.
Not a bad job, you two. You're good at fighting together.
He praised the strange duo, who looked at each other curiously once this was said, neither unaware of the slight visual motif their duo shared with one Vegeta made up with Broly, as well as the fact their on-the-fly combination were simple 1-2 setup combos with little time to put towards any kind of real synchronized and practice techniques. Both sweat drop at the hollow compliment and realized Vegeta probably wasn't the best judge of this, while probably just using this for a good way to work out, causing him to share a tired laugh as Kakarot hopped down behind Vegeta, who turned to look at him neutrally.
This was instantly very awkward for Kakarot, as he was forced to deal with the consequences for his actions that violence wouldn't solve. After a bit, he stilled himself and opened his mouth to ask his question, only for Vegeta to then finally interrupt by asking what he was doing there cluelessly, flustering Kakarot and getting a chuckle out of Vegeta at correctly reading the other Saiyan.
Look, I apologize for hitting you, but I gotta ask you.
Apologize about disrespecting our comrades before me. Also for laughing at me. That was rude.
Kakarot's eyes twitched at the earnest and almost deliberately annoying purity of such a statement, but reluctantly, he recited the apologies, and Vegeta this time allowed him to finish his question, which was of course about Ozaru control, which also perked the somewhat recovered Tarbo's ears, as he and Zarbon distastefully scarfed down on their lunch of Vampa beetles, and he took notice of the big grin Vegeta now wore.
Well, since you and I are even now, the trading of info should be mutual. You get the secrets to the Ozaru if I get the secrets to Super Saiyan.
Kakarot rolls his eyes, having expected such, honestly, but soon realizes he hasn't ever verbalized the process, and so had a bit of trouble doing so now.
Fine. Basically, you have to die.
His response was a silent and confused, blank expression from the other two Saiyans and Zarbon as he joined them.
But then don't die and become a raging, vengeful ghost.
Vegeta and Tarbo blink again while looking at Kakarot oddly, mostly because that just didn't make sense to them. Nevertheless, Vegeta tried to base a theory from it as he had nothing else to go off of.
You're saying you need to be pushed to the edge of death. Could it have something to do with our Zenkais? And you said rage, so extreme anger and the edge of death, huh?
Something like that. Now your side of the bargain.
Vegeta smiles back and simply explains the concept.
Basically, you can't submit to your primal instincts.
The exact opposite of what had just happened takes place when Tarbo speaks up.
When Saiyans become an Ozaru, there's a subconscious submission to the feral battle instinct. If you maintain a sense of self and will yourself to, you can make those feral instincts instead submit to you in a way and be coherent in the form. It actually has to do with Blux waves and brain chemistry, but I don't think you'd care.
Kakarot smirks and chuckles genuinely at that, before leaving to resume his training with renewed vigor. The idea sounded simple enough in principle, and now it's time for results. As he left, Vegeta would grow quiet and introspective as he came up with a new plan for his and Tarbo's training. Staring up at Vampa's sky, he looked to his younger brother next to him and shocked him with his plan. Once Kakarot returned to Broly and revealed the lesson he'd learned, he was instantly spurred on into trying it, and for the first time on planet Vampa, Kakarot purposely looked up at his massive moon and began to flood his body with Blux waves, and he quickly began to grow and morph into the more savage Saiyan transformation. Curious if the lesson he'd learned had helped, Broly stared down his now massive younger brother and subordinate, hoping to see some sign of his control of the state as he did with Super Saiyan.
Kakarot, you okay?
Hard to think.
It seemed as if the man he viewed as a little brother was in pain, causing Broly to worry some, but Kakarot stubbornly clung to his sanity, fighting the primal power, attempting to bend it to his will instead of the other way around. He was a Super Saiyan, and this stupid monkey power was little more than noise to him. A means to an end of not Broly or Vegeta or even in the universe's goals, but his own and his own freedom. And there was just one thing he'd been wanting to do with that freedom again for a long time.
Broly, fight me!
Kakarot roared. The commander could tell why he wanted this. His brother, since he'd met him, had learned and lived through struggle and combat, as far back as when he tried his hardest to force Paragus to recognize him and train the two alongside one another. There was a period that Kakarot had long ago seemed to lose, that he only now saw when Kakarot was fighting for his own reasons and enjoying himself while doing so. Honestly, just seeing that gave him some hope and excited his Saiyan instincts as well.
Come at me, soldier,
Broly said, getting into a combat stance as the massive ape flew at him. Skipping forward some, time passed tensely as there was still no movement from the enemy. The Saiyans and rebels would work tirelessly to achieve their increases in power, needed to overwhelm their already overwhelming and now precognition opponent. And progress was slow, even though training was done at a frantic and almost fearful speed. Kakarot's progress with Ozaru came in steps, first conquering his primal fighting instincts to return to the more controlled and methodical method of combat he tempered in the Frieza Fort. Next came finding a balance and comfort in the much larger and heavier form, something Broly was actually the perfect teacher for, allowing the brothers to immaturely test their strength against each other in those giant states. Finally, once those first two goals had been accomplished, both Broly and Kakarot himself reasoned that the stacking of Ozaru form with Kakarot's Super Saiyan state should now theoretically be possible. And on this day, it will be attempted. Meanwhile, a pair of biological Saiyan brothers were also hard at work with their training.
Vegeta really is gonna kill us.
Tarbo would constantly think, as he and Vegeta would continue to day by day act in harsh spars high above planet Vampa's surface, and oftentimes inside one of its very rough and vicious outer layers of turbulence, where it was very hard to breathe, see, and move around, much less fight. Vegeta had reasoned that Cold's #1 advantage would always be his ability to survive the vacuum space. It made any place they fought his turf by birthright.
Saiyans couldn't survive in space, but they did have incredibly adaptable bodies. And it was also once thought that Saiyans couldn't defeat Frieza or his father, or defend weaker races in their freedom. If the path to Super Saiyan was scorned with death, and they also had a weakness to overcome anyway, then it made sense to kill 2 space bursts with 1 ki blast, and train for both at the same time. Hence, Tarble and Vegeta's new training regimen of hardcore drag-out sparring nearly in space. And to their credit, their lungs are getting stronger and allowing them to operate with less and less oxygen, but they would always be unable to do so with absolutely none. Vegeta then reasoned they needed to somehow use their ki, or spirits, to somehow insulate and hold a certain amount of oxygen so as to make up for this, but it was extremely hard to do so without a massive amount of power. At this point, causing Tarble to very much wish he could still be training with Zarbon and the other rebels, since Frieza's former lackey had been given the job of group training against the rebel soldiers, allowing them to gain even more experience against a superior opponent with the transformation, while that opponent could still get a decent amount of training in. The tired former princes were just about to call their training for the day when the unmistakable power of Kakarot, which had already been very easy to sense alongside Broly's, seemed to explode almost exponentially. This seemed to suggest that the double power-up had somehow worked, and they excitedly went down to witness it. But Vegeta then sensed that the spirit of Kakarot had just become massively distorted and very upset. Even more so than when he'd first assumed the Great Ape form, causing Vegeta to believe that there was something very wrong. And he couldn't be more right, because on that day, nearly all life on planet Vampa vanished.
The universe calls on a fallen hero. What if Goku was sent to planet Vampa, Part 5?
3 sets of footsteps proceed down into the darkest and dankest portion of the maximum security solitary confinement area of the Galactic Patrol prison, a location of the spacefaring penitentiary neglected not for lack of danger, but simply because the only detainee on this level had been locked away with all intention of being left to rot. The trio's reasoning for coming here is pure desperation born of a new crisis. The smallest of the trio is a nervous fellow who seems to jump at every odd creak or groan of the massive underbelly of the jail, while his companions who stoically flank him as protectors remain completely calm. As they reach the door to a control room and protective viewing area meant to monitor the prisoner's cell and enter it, they notice the air grows tense and almost smells of ozone from the sheer amount of power lying dormant here. Losing heart, the cowardly one decides to turn back, but his helmet-bearing attendant stops him.
Your Highness, we're presently out of options. 2/3 of the universe have already fallen to the enemy. This is our only hope. He is.
Wincing in recognition of the truth, the newly appointed king of the Galactic Patrol, Jocko, orders the release of prisoner 5985, causing the other regal-looking attendant to nod solemnly as he uncovers and presses a button which halts a machine used to disperse the key of this prisoner around the massive structure like a battery, used in order to keep him sedated, seeing as how this was all they could ever do to keep him imprisoned. After a few quiet minutes, those around with any key sense whatsoever shudder as prisoner 5985 awakens. Kakarot's eyes burst wide in panic, as he isn't even afforded the pleasure of a slow and groggy awakening due to the sudden surging of his energy returning to him so quickly, snapping him awake with his mind solely on thoughts of Broly, Vegeta, the rebellion, Cold, and the unworthily held powers of Tulo. As he tries to work his sore and unused jaw to yell out in fury and confusion, he finds that he simply cannot due to his body simply not cooperating, his mouth and entire body honestly feeling dried and withered beyond belief. Then to pour salt on his wounds, the pitch black void he found himself in, with its only source of light being a dim red glow overhead, is suddenly flooded with harshly bright artificial lights shining down a hallway, instantly searing his dry eyes and causing him to flinch and begin struggling against his bindings violently as he realized that this was a prison cell.
Whoa there! Your name is Kakarot, right? I'm gonna need you to relax.
Shielding his eyes behind his now extremely long hair, Kakarot strains against his binding still, causing the entire room and seemingly the entirety of whatever structure they were in to shake, all while wanting to verbally retort back how a cool head was impossible when one is as confused as he is right now. However, the 2 people escorting the speaker suddenly raised their hands with key blasts at the ready.
You cut that out or I'll blow you away.
I advise you to heed our warning. We awoke you for a reason, so there's no need to destroy the machine restraining you.
This, however, doesn't calm the rebel, who has to assume he has been captured by the Cold Empire, and this only makes him more frantic. But as if sensing this, the trio suddenly point to the insignia they bear and reveal themselves as ex-rebels. Calming down but staying wary, the Saiyan grunts in irritation, recognizing that cooperation will get him further than trying to destroy everything and making more conflict for himself. He ceases his struggling and manages a nod, but then finally wills his body to allow at least a single word to escape him.
thirsty.
The three figures share their own wary glances to one another before returning Kakarot's nod, as if they recognize the lack of alternative options than whatever it is that has driven them to this path. The helmeted guard then reaches a hand up the wall behind him and grabs onto a lever that he flexes and actually has to power up in order to pull. When the metal bar finally slams down into the opposite slot, Kakarot feels individual locks on his hands and feet disengage before finally releasing him completely. But due to the muscle atrophy in his legs, he quickly falls forward, unable to support himself with them until he remembers to float just before slamming his head into the metal floor. Those that freed him ignore this blunder, still showing apprehension to release Kakarot, but nonetheless order him to follow them as there is a lot to talk about. A few minutes later, after climbing a few staircases, they finally reach an elevator, and stepping inside, or entirely floating in Kakarot's case, the reflective metal doors shut, and the new group of four begin to rise from the depths of the prison as Kakarot's debriefing begins. First of all, according to the bucket-headed guard, Vegeta was the one who put him in this prison, as he was apparently considered a major threat, something Kakarot found weird, since he for one thought that was obvious to everyone a long time ago. Though that was the least of his shock, as he now was finally getting a good look at himself. Not only was he lacking most of the impressive musculature that he'd built up over the years due to how famished he was, his appearance was also completely different now, causing him several seconds of delay between seeing his new strange form and actually reacting to it with an initial feeling of aversion at something so new and foreign to him. Still unable to speak very well, the warrior is quietly left with trying to piece together this mystery, confused why he's in a place like this when King Cold could launch his attack on the rebel army at any time, and what in the galaxy has happened to him. As they prepare for a seemingly difficult to communicate explanation, Kakarot gets a bad feeling about the grim expressions from 2 out of his 3 new companions.
The conflict, now commonly regarded as the Cold War, concluded 8 years ago. You've been locked in here ever since.
After a moment to process that statement, Kakarot's face twists up in disbelief and annoyance at what he obviously perceives as an idiotic lie.
If you don't believe it, then just use that damnable curse of yours.
Confusion again plagues the Saiyan until a spark of some sixth sense finally kicks in as he rubs the base of his neck and remembers the term once used for Tulo's future vision. Unwilling to believe such a thing, he reluctantly tries to pull harder on this sense, but it is more like he is the one being pulled. His mind is suddenly jerked back through time in order to allow him to bear witness to the events that led him here, proving that he indeed was the current holder of Tulo's curse, not King Cold, and somehow this power is not how it once was. The stream of time finally ends its reverse flow, leaving Kakarot in a spectral form with a perfect view of his repugnant home planet, Vampa, the last location he was before his memory blanks. He even feels a bittersweet happiness at finally seeing familiar faces in the vestiges of Vegeta and Tarble in the midst of their super high altitude training. However, a golden light shines from the planet in a pillar that causes the usually tempestuous atmosphere to settle almost entirely as the ground begins to rumble. Vegeta and Tarbo of the past quickly rush down to the planet's surface with haste, and present Kakarot finds that he can move his consciousness freely in this space as he follows with a similar feeling of panic and intrigue. Upon arrival, he is met with a sight he has absolutely no memory of: Broly gigantified and protecting the rebel home base from a giant golden Great Ape that is unmistakably his past self. The rebels begin to evacuate the base at Broly's order as he strains hard, even in his Akari state, to hold the old Kakarot back while he rampages fiercely towards their allies, almost disregarding Broly entirely in the process. However, as the ape's rampage is impeded, his anger grows and so does his massive body, which begins to leak an aggressive red ki that causes the air around it to mirage from its sheer intense heat. Broly grits his teeth as the flesh on his hands begin to sizzle due to his grapple with his younger brother. Vegeta and Tarbo then suddenly appear on the shaggy Saiyan general's shoulders and fire off twin ki blasts into Kakarot's eyes, which causes the beast to scream in agony and rear back in pain as a deafening bellow rings throughout the planet. Even present Kakarot winces as he feels a phantom pain sting his eyes and covers his ears to relieve the splitting pain of the hellish noise.
Don't hurt Kakarot too badly. We just need to hold him off until everyone else can move to headquarters, and we get him back under control.
Yeah, I don't think that's gonna be enough to actually harm him. This is a lot more than 10 times as strong as Super Saiyan. We can't hold back if we want to live.
Past Kakarot then provides valid reasoning for Vegeta's apprehension as he stops clutching his eyes, which now burn red with fury, and suddenly fires off massive eye beams, powerful enough that Broly has no choice but to shrink in order to avoid them. However, doing so means some of the rebels behind them are left defenseless, and thus a single ship full of their allies is caught up in the attack and explodes as quick as a flash. Both Broly and Vegeta's eyes look on at the casualties that moments before were loyal brothers in arms, doing their best to collectively work towards peace and equality. Rage builds in both, and compounded with all the other recent stresses they've had to endure as leaders in this conflict, their hearts suddenly explode with righteous energy, and the planet begins to quake even harder. Kakarot roars in defiance and charges on all fours at a blistering speed like a rabid beast, only for Vegeta and Broly to bring his gallop to a halt as their auras begin to burn fiercely golden. Wanting no further bloodshed between comrades, the two combine their now immense ki to try and calm the past Kakarot using spirit control. However, this seems to be almost completely ineffective, whether because even now the past Kakarot still commands a massive gap in power, growing ever wider in correlation to his rage, that while easily able to solve their King Cold problem, will only create a much larger, more dangerous issue if he cannot control it, or because the two Saiyan masters Yardratty and Spirit Control are unsure if it's even possible to calm their junior's indomitable spirit. Either way, the battle only grows more intense. Present-day Kakarot finds himself engrossed with this struggle, but he begins to strain in order to continue viewing it with such clarity, and suddenly loses the vision altogether, snapping back to reality and finding himself now having been escorted out of his cell and into what appears to be the prison's cafeteria, though he is currently its only occupant adorned in the orange prison garb. Otherwise, a guard is stationed at nearly every point of entry nearby, and only now is he beginning to realize this caution towards him is not born from anything as petty as prejudice towards the Saiyan race.
How much did you see?
The helmeted patrolman asks as he set a tray piled with the leftover slop the prisoners usually ate in front of the mutated Saiyan. After a moment to gather his thoughts and get over the sight of such a disgusting meal, Kakarot finally responds.
If Broly and Vegeta became Super Saiyans, and I had the power of the Golden Ozaru, then that means we won, right?
Though all Kakarot received was a silent stare and the sight of his own unease reflected back at him. Just then, they are joined by the well-groomed guard known as Mirrors.
Restore your strength. I believe allowing you to answer your questions on your own would be most productive.
Just answer me, damn it! How do I even have Tulo's powers? And since when did they work like that?
But as soon as his temper begins to spike, Kakarot feels as if an outside force reins him into silencing himself and breathing deeply. The peaceful patrolman simply gives him an almost pitying smile and extends a spoon to use for his meal. Grunting in displeasure, the imprisoned revolutionary begins choking down his food to regain his strength, since this future vision ability seems to be very draining. After 6 more trays of food in a tense hour or so, Kakarot is finally prompted to continue exploring his strength of future vision, and he decides to this time do so in the meditative state he'd been taught by Broly when centering his mind was necessary. This combined with no longer being only skin and bones helped to ease the learning curve of this foreign and apparently evolving ability, as Kakarot now found it easier to pull on the threads of time he'd been viewing in order to continue where he left off from. Still a bit shaky though, he realizes he is far from mastery, as all the excitement has passed when he manifests his consciousness in the past again. The planet of Vampa is now devoid of any non-native life. The rebels currently hovering just off-world in their remaining ships to view whether their last hope would end up snuffing them out in this mad gamble for power. Just as it seems the clash will continue, past Kakarot suddenly collapses and Vegeta and Broly soon rest atop his giant sleeping form in exhaustion, thankful to have even survived such an encounter, as apparently Super Saiyan mixed with Ozaru yielded powers beyond one's wildest dreams. However, as the two Saiyan generals begin to chuckle in relief, present Kakarot himself can't help but smile, seeing their joy at what they perceive to be a wonderful development. Learning from his mistake last time, Kakarot this time decides to try and skim the past for the interesting bits, rather than watching every waking moment of the near decade he'd missed. Thus, skipping forward several days helps him come to the same realization as Broly and the Rebellion about 4 days into past Kakarot's golden Great Ape transformation holding strong. For some reason, just as with this new state, Kakarot was not returning to base form, and even more shocking was that he was not gaining any recognizable signs of his higher intelligence or his inhibitions. After monitoring past Kakarot from Vampa's orbit, the Rebellion is at least encouraged by the discovery that while they are off-world, instead of causing more destruction, Kakarot's beastly past self behaves in an almost gentle and benevolent way, acting as both apex predator and protector of the repugnant world and peacefully maintaining the circle of life between the Bob Beast and Vampa beetles, while driving off any intruders to the planet, so to speak, as any attempts for them to return to the planet while he is aware of them in an aggression, leading Tarble to a theory.
I think Kakarot has essentially been consumed by his Ozaru form. This may explain why it's basically become his base form, and why his primal instincts are all he seems to know: eat, sleep, protect territory.
Seeing that Broly's face turns up in disgust and worry at such an idea, Tarble quickly rescinds his comment and reminds it's only a theory, and that he could eventually burn himself out and return to normal.
On the chance that Tarble is correct, where does that leave us? Broly and I accessed Super Saiyan, but it's still as new to us as it was to Kakarot. And what's more, we lost good men and one of our strongest fighters just to achieve it. We need to make sure those sacrifices are worth it. No matter what, we have to end this war.
As Vegeta says this and looks to him, Broly looks back to Vampa and suddenly puts his fingers to his head and disappears, shocking everyone. The rebels begin crowding around their monitors to watch what happens next, as Vegeta prepares to jump after his friend, seeing him begin approaching past Kakarot in the middle of snacking on an old and sickly Bob Beast in order to put it out of its misery and satiate his feral hunger. But Broly stops him by speaking over comms.
Stand by. I have my own theory I need to test.
Past Kakarot finally takes notice of Broly and instantly speeds towards him, but Broly stays calm and watches carefully as his younger brother leaps at him headfirst and tries to snap him up with his massive jaws, causing Broly to smirk and dodge at the last minute by leaping away and confirming his suspicions.
Tarble, you may be right, but all of Kakarot's primal instincts aren't bad. He's playing. It's the dodging game we used to play with Ba in order to train.
Kakarot then goes for a second chomp and then another, and even with the gap in their powers, especially with Broly in his base form, the massive creature deliberately goes easily enough on his playmate as to not end his fun.
Listen to me, we have not lost Kakarot. We will win this war. Maybe if I can learn to control him, we can aim him at cold. Then all Vegeta and me have to do is set that slippery bastard up for Kakarot to tear apart.
The rebellion cheers. Vegeta directs them to find the nearest habitable planet and set up on it as they finalize their training. After a short deliberation to decide how much time the task of taming Kakarot's new power and mastering Super Saiyan for Broly and Vegeta is going to take, and decide to set one more week before it will become necessary to press their advantage on King Cold before it is gone. So everything and nothing change at the same time. As Cold is paying his way into handouts of power, the rebels continue clawing for each lowly scrap of it they can earn in order to achieve their goals. As a result, the royal siblings end up introducing the entire army to their extreme high altitude training, since they had been spending a few days high in the atmosphere anyway, and the more troops they had resistant to suffocating in the vacuum of space, the better. In return, Broly does his best to keep Kakarot docile enough to teach at least Tarble and Vegeta the bite and dodge game. They attempt to do the same with Zarbon and the rest of the army, but as Kakarot only had a majority of bad experience with Zarbon, and most of the rebels were former Frieza soldiers who'd once looked down on and mistreated the Saiyan and his kind, it is a near fruitless effort. However, fear of dying via their commander's insane training regiment rather than the battle it's meant to prepare them for acts as sufficient motivation to push the rebel army way past their limits. Not to mention, with King Cold on the run and the likes of King Kai able to help them advocate their cause, it was now much easier to receive goodwill from civilians around the universe in favor of freedom. The present Kakarot, while impressed by all this, is admittedly annoyed when recognizing that both Broly and Vegeta seem to fundamentally grasp Super Saiyan better than he did, and become comfortable and efficient with the transformation extremely quickly, enough that they can easily rile the past Golden Uzaru Kakarot up into a frenzy if they spar too hard and anger him. The gap in power now closer, but still very much present between them. The generals don't dwell on this, however, wagering that their current strength will have to be enough. The longer they wait, the more likely it is looking into the future would give Cold an advantage. So, the official strategy meeting to defeat King Cold begins, which Kakarot decides to skip completely over out of disinterest.
Doubt whatever our side came up with in terms of plans survived contact with the enemy. Besides, I'm tired of this fancy movie from hell. Show me how I became this!
On command, Kakarot's astral form suddenly surges forward in both time and space, until coming to a rest somewhere near the center of the universe on May 26th of age 767. He looks around the expansive void as nothing of note is really there, until a massive shadow passes overhead, and he looks up to see a metallic and almost undulating moon drifting along. Ports on this mechanical moon suddenly open all over and begin to pour out hundreds of thousands of identical robot soldiers, all mass manufactured and made forever loyal to King Cold thanks to Dr. Mew's Big Daddy star design. If the rebels were going to continue to steal the Empire's troops anyway, then automation was the smartest new direction to take the family planetary genocide business.
This is where the fun begins. We'll celebrate this new age of my reign with a universal day of carnage. From now on, that which does not worship me as overlord will be reduced to ash and replaced by metal. That way, only the worthy shall prosper under my rule.
Floating closer to the metallic star, Kakarot sees that atop it stands Cold himself, in all his newly augmented glory as he oversees his troops departing across the galaxy. Suddenly though, Cold shudders and his eyes snap over to the exact spot Kakarot's astral form is presently in, as if in this moment in the past, Cold's future vision was giving him sight beyond sight. However, the tyrant merely sweat drops and mumbles about seeing things after all the weird stuff he'd endured to gain his new powers. Then, perfectly timed thanks to the Emperor's view into the future, the rebel fleet arrives arrives and begins their final assault, led by the newly minted generals Tarble and Zarbon, as they begin clashing with and trying to push back the metallic army before they can spread very far. Each individual robotic soldier isn't terribly viable since they are limited to being only a tad stronger than some of the most elite warriors the Cold Empire had ever known, as a holdover of the Cold Dynasty's crippling paranoia. But where the good Dr. Mew's true evil genius lies is in the army's hive mind AI, which allows Cold's new forces to act as an immune system, so to speak, adapting to and perfectly countering whatever kills their brethren, and then transmitting that data back to the star itself to act as a factory and replace fallen troops with updated and improved ones. If not for the sheer growth in the rebel army's power, they would have already been overran, and seeing this causes the Emperor to sneer and raise a hand to throw a key blast to disrupt their ranks. However, his eye twitches with visions of the future, and he suddenly leaves the destructive ball of energy where he'd been standing while leaping just before Vegeta and Broly instant transmission on either side of him for a sneak attack, flipping it into a trap for them. The two are lucky enough to leap away just as the key explodes, and Cold once again decides to try and pick Vegeta off first by quickly appearing behind him and trying to behead him with a knife-handed chop, but he's met only with air as golden light causes the prince to move far faster than the vision of the future showed him he would, and thus allowing Vegeta to knock him directly towards Broly, who viciously plants his foot hard enough to shake the big Getty star and burst into SSJ as well, as he delivers a lariat meant to give Cold a taste of his own medicine. The Emperor is sent flying end over end and finally falls flat on his back before coughing up blood and grasping at his crushed throat, desperate for air. Unwilling to risk any form of mercy, however, the Saiyan commanders quickly combine their power to release twin full-powered energy beams of blue and green that slam into and consume Cold, gouging off a significant portion of his shiny new space station in the process. But as the smoke clears away, their fears confirmed, as both the Emperor and his new base of operations begin to repair themselves, or in the case of Cold, transform altogether.
Quite impressive. I've seen several timelines where you were only able to singe me a bit. Is it time to use that stupid monkey you fools are betting on as a trump card now?
You aren't scaring anybody with your little magic trick.
None of this is natural for you, is it, Cold? I'm willing to bet you're pumped full of a cocktail of different shortcuts to power all mangled up inside you. If we push you far enough, your body is gonna give out.
Cold then rises back into the air in his new form, no worse for wear, and smirks at Broly as he unleashes his power, which now is far more comparative to the Saiyans, and raises his hands to return their earlier ki blast to them. However, in perfect sync, the two resort to spirit-controlled duplication and use the illusion to slip out of Cold's attacks and re-engage him from his blind spot, wagering their better teamwork and fighting skill against his raw power. This stalemate continues as more and more rebels begin to fall due to the evolving robotic threat. Tarble does his best to issue commands, but the looming power of Cold in his new form makes focusing even harder. Not to mention it had seemed to result in a power boost for the robots as well. Wait a minute. Vegeta and Broly, in the midst of their life or death struggle, are then shocked to hear Tarble speak over their comms with important intel.
Hey, you two need to fast-track your plan. Get Cold out of here ASAP, you hear me? The robots in that weird planet are feeding off his power.
The Emperor smirks at being found out and only increases his energy output to further amplify his soldiers with the power needed to deal with this rubbish. But Broly and Vegeta refuse to relent and implement their true plan regardless, suddenly mad dashing in to try and get a hold of the Frost Demon in order to use transmission to bring him to Vampa as the proverbial lion's den. Foreseeing this, the Emperor focuses on dodging their physical attacks and countering ruthlessly, slowly draining the two of energy even further and putting them at a major disadvantage. Wanting to end it, Cold creates a supernova and lobs it at the Saiyans and rebels behind them. Due to a painful lesson learned while first battling the past Kakarot, the two without a second thought redirect this attack with all their might right back, and Cold, temporarily blinded by his arrogance, is forced to take his own attack lest the big Getty star itself be destroyed, stunning him and leaving him open for the two warriors to suddenly grab onto him and instant transmission him across the universe by locking onto Kakarot's massive power level. A second later, and the big Getty star and its robotic soldiers quickly begin to lose strength as their power amplifier travels out of reach. With a joyous war cry, Tarble and Zarbon lead the army through the rest of the robots like paper, since they are forced to rely on the reserves of the space station's main and already overtaxed generators. And from there, their forces head into the starbase itself to begin destroying it. On Vampa, the trio land roughly as Cold whips Vegeta and Broly away and rarely looks around, anticipating Kakarot's arrival, unsure how he'd been caught off guard so critically. He at least takes solace in seeing how drained Vegeta and Broly are, but a flash of the future warns him that Vegeta is about to fire a weak ki blast at him. As he lifts a hand to counter it, he is instead blindsided as the immense power and mass of Kakarot finally does come barreling into him and knocks him nearly off-world and unconscious with a single furious blow. Reeling from it, Cold prepares to simply damn them all ball and blasts the planet from orbit, but Vegeta, already prepared due to his training, intercepts this and is there to slam Cold right back down to be Kakarot's chew toy, resulting in the king being wailed on mercilessly by the ferocious ape until growing angry enough himself to force his body into evolving beyond its limits one last time.
That's it. I will not die like my son. I am an emperor. I am worthy.
Kakarot just uncaringly slams back into Cold and primarily tests his power against the Emperors with a grapple. Any gap in power Cold had just created by transforming is quickly consumed as Kakarot's fiery ki begins to burn him, causing Cold to try and escape his grasp at all costs. The heat and pressure continue to build until Cold's primary two hands suddenly snap backwards painfully as Kakarot proves his superior power once again. Humiliated in agony and taking advantage of now having full arms, the dastardly tyrant tries to solidly place them both on the planet's surface for detonation, but for some reason the energy he imparts dissipates instantly, and he sees that Broly is using the remainder of his strength in order to protect the planet's core. With Vegeta able to keep him from fleeing, Broly blocking his attempts at his trump card, and Kakarot's wild strength being aimed squarely at Cold's head, he'd effectively been locked in a guillotine, and every vision of the future was slowly beginning to reflect the same pitiful end for him, the horror of his end, just as he'd been warned. Kakarot suddenly reels back from his view of the past as that same feeling of dread returns to him and kicks him out almost, and finds himself now occupying what appears to be the prison's bathing area.
Clean up, you stink!
Ordered the helmeted galactic patrolman Kakarot had learned was named Zabel. He growls in irritation, but after a test sniff, recognizes that 8 years of dirt is hell on his nose anyway, and does as told. And suddenly, a single question comes to mind.
Where is my brother? There's no way Cold killed him, and I'm sure he'd want to talk with me. You trying to convince me or yourself? I've already told you there's no question you can't answer for yourself. Stop hiding from the truth.
This time, Kakarot is all but thrown back into his vision by the power of this statement and the emotion in it. Returning to the moment, Cold seemed to accept his fate. The Emperor suddenly powers up to maximum strength and charges straight for Kakarot, who does the same in an attempt to end this kaiju battle. And obviously, when they clash, Cold is the one on the receiving end of terrible damage. Ironically, much like he'd done to Tulo, as Kakarot's massive fist had been driven through his opponent's chest.
What an amazing beast you are. You are worthy.
Suddenly, Cold used this position to jab Kakarot at the base of his neck, causing the ape to writhe in pain and reel away from the collapsing Emperor of the universe.
No way! Why would he? Kakarot! Yes. Dance on the future's grave. Reduce everything to ash for me, slave.
As the past Kakarot's primal mind is plagued with shifting visions of the future, he is thrown into a rampage far fiercer than any Broly has ever seen. And it quickly becomes evident to the present Kakarot that his past self cannot keep up this strenuous frenzy for long before it will result in his death and unthinkable destruction. So why was he still here?
Vegeta, you'll need to lead everyone from here on out. Don't worry, the hard part is over, my friend.
Broly, not you too. We've lost enough.
Kakarot is my little brother. My responsibility. I pushed him into this. I need to get him out. I don't see how else to do that.
The implication finally becomes clear for present Kakarot, as for the first time in a very long time, his heart is gripped by grief and fear. He watches as Broly tiredly flies to his out-of-control adopted brother, and even though dangerous, maneuvers his exhausted body to hug himself to Kakarot's chest, right above his currently oversized and uncontrollably beating heart. Past Kakarot lets out a howl of anguish and beats Broly in his chest in confusion, but his brother holds on as if the blows are love taps, even as his already heavy blood loss begins to soak into Ba's treasured ear around his waist. He smiles softly to himself as he imparts his final words with his brother, and begins to emanate a bright green light from his own heart, and past Kakarot begins to both calm and shrink. And while it's more than likely his past self never heard any of this, the present version hangs on his adoptive siblings' every word.
Listen, Kakarot, you're too old to throw tantrums anymore. It's time to wake up. You have a big responsibility now, little brother. You still need to atone for when you worked for Frieza. Besides, you have to make everyone proud. My dad, yours, Beats, Raditz, Nappa, Tulo, and everyone else. And now me. Make me proud, little brother.
Broly himself becomes the light which is absorbed by Kakarot's heart. The present version watches as his past self finally stops shrinking and shredding golden fur, until being left in the same state that he finds himself in now. His questions finally answered, Kakarot allows himself to slip back to the present following these revelations, wanting no more to do with this ability. When finished bathing, he is issued a fresh jumpsuit and only now realizes he's been carrying Ba's ear with him. Tying it back to his waist now, it's almost too heavy of a burden for him. Patrolman Zabel then leads him back to a meeting room occupied by King Jocko and Patrolman Miras. Once there, Zabel fills in the rest of the blanks to avoid any further formalities.
After that, Vegeta returned with only an unconscious you and proof that the Cold War was over. The Big Getty Star and Cold's cohorts were captured and dismantled to be used to improve the Galactic Patrol prison, which is where it was decided you would be held in light of your crimes and our inability to execute you, seeing the danger you pose.
So the reason you guys mentioned earlier for freeing me, I assume it's something more dangerous.
Oh yes, much more dangerous than you. However, we believe you may be just the thing we need to deal with it. Kakarot, what we're offering here is another chance to be this universe's savior.
As a vision of a barren and lifeless future comes to Kakarot and he waves it away, now starting to feel as if his view into the future was somehow keeping Broly around to be the angel on his shoulder, he responds,
I ain't no hero, but if someone is threatening my universe, I've got no problem slaughtering them.
But that...
This video is sponsored by DJ the Lazy Gamer and Crimson Manifesto. Hey y'all, just before we begin, I want to get all our shoutouts done now, as I had a lot of help from some awesome people to help me in trying to make this my best Dragon Ball What If to date, and I really want you to go support them. First off, in terms of visuals, a big thank you to Zala, who's handled most of the art for the series, as well as newcomer Jurgen Jays, who did some custom background work for me. An even bigger one to AcetheWindRider AKA the Ranger Base for handling the visuals editing of the video. Sound-wise, thanks to Dragon Ball University for providing voice acting, Mard LMS aka Jim for help with the audio editing, and to the various artists and composers who created the music used in this project's soundtrack that'll be listed throughout the video. Finally, to my good friend Pickled Dill, who helped me to arrange all that music, as well as gave some major help in scripting out my thoughts for this part. And last thing, there's going to be a stat bar on screen that shows my subscribe versus unsubscribe numbers. Please subscribe, it helps out the channel, yada yada yada. Let's get on with the show.
Baby Boo the Plague versus Kakarot the Scar. The finale of What If Goku Was Sent to Planet Vampa begins now.
Our tale resumes once again with a view years into the past, but this time, back to what originally seemed less than interesting in comparison with the epic conclusion to King Cold's last desperate grasp at universal domination. As the Big Getty Star begins to lose operating power due to the King's absence, a control room located at the space station's center falls into chaos as Cold's final four biological lackeys, and therefore his top generals, quickly lose all direction. Babidi accusingly brings up the very poignant question of why Dr. Mew would do something as stupid as to tie their main trump card to Cold himself being within range. However, the Doctor coolly replies that he simply made the invention to the King and that sniveling whelp Kikuno's specifications. It isn't his fault that the tyrant happened to be egotistical, short-sighted, and in constant need of reassurance from yes-men. Berry Blue lowly snarls in contemptuous agreement, as having served the Cold family for the longest, she had come to understand their particular weaknesses, and her king had always suffered from nearly crippling overconfidence, while Kikuno droops his head in shame at similarly being unable to deny the accusations of the newcomers to their regime. Ever the pragmatist, Berry Blue looks to the three men, asking what exactly they are to do now with their master's seemingly imminent defeat close at hand. Kikuno smartly suggests surrender, but Babidi calls him a worthless slime, having not come so close to universal domination only to hand it over to some overgrown apes at the final stage. Mew concurs with the wizard, though this is not to say that he has already forgiven the initial shifting of the blame to him, and so in his own harsh tone asks what great feat of magic he has in mind to win the day, causing Babidi to growl back that nothing can do that. The day and the battle are obviously lost, but if he has anything to say about it, the war will not be. He simply just needs another puppet to replace Cold. Kikuno shoots the wizard a dirty look for speaking about his king that way, before Babidi can rebuke him or brag that he was never on their side. The sound of hammering boots on the metal heralds the imminent arrival of the rebel vanquishers. Moments later, the door to the control room bursts open, with the squad circling the lackeys and ordering them to surrender at once. As one, the four of them raise their hands and allow themselves to be cuffed and seized. However, before anything more can happen, another man enters the room, bearing the insignia of leadership. And for Kikuno and Berry Blue in particular, this is terrible news. General Zarbon of the rebellion surveys the pair of Frieza Force loyalists with a sneer on his lips, while to his left, one of the soldiers asks if he knows who they are. Zarbon coldly states that they served in both Frieza and Cold's inner circles, being complicit in many of the atrocities commanded by both father and son long before any of them in the room were even born. This mention of Frieza makes several of the soldiers bristle, with the one who spoke up asking what Zarbon wants to do with them. Ice in his voice, the general replies that only one punishment fits such crimes, before raising a hand and casually blowing Kikuno away.
Cold fury in her own tone, Berry Blue curses Zarbon as a traitor, but the general does not dignify this with a response, instead simply ending her just as he did her compatriot. Bobbity and Mew watch this cold-hearted display with matching looks of shocked horror on their faces, before looking up at the teal-skinned man as if silently questioning whether they are about to meet a similar fate. Thankfully for them, Zarbon does not know either of them, and so instructs his soldiers to take the wizard and the not-so-good doctor back to their ships for questioning. However, from seemingly within everyone's own head, a new voice speaks up. It is polite and refined sounding, though it makes Bobbity shudder just as much as the appearance of Zarbon did to Kikino and Berry Blue. Because this is the Supreme Kai speaking. He apologizes for only contacting them now, however, partly blames that as the Northern Supreme, or as they know him, King Kai, chose to hold off on alerting him of the wizard Bobbity's involvement. The Supreme Kai implores the rebels to not allow Bobbity to continue living, laying bare his litany of crimes throughout the ages, as well as attributing a few to him that rightly belonged to his sire, Bibbidi, though in Shin's mind, the wizards are one and the same. He then finishes with a brief recounting of the events surrounding the monster Majin Buu, praising that had they not defeated him, King Cold could have been just as much of a menace to the galaxy under Bobbity's thrall, and so for that reason, he cannot be spared, lest his magic produce another similar threat. Zarbon is smart enough to know that arguing with God rarely ends well, and so with a nod, gestures one of his men to do away with Bobbity as well. As a blaster is raised in his face, Bobbity shrieks this can't be his end, before lunging at Mew and throwing him in front of him. However, being surrounded, another soldier simply raises their blaster and guns Bobbity down anyway from behind, ending the wizard's dreams in a reign of terror, or so the rebels and even the Kais think, though none of them notice the faint glyph marking Mew's flesh at the point where Bobbity touched him. And so, peace returns to the universe at last. Those who serve King Cold till the end are tried for their crimes during the war, and Dr. Mew is no exception. As the last living member of Cold's inner circle, there are many among the Galactic Patrol hierarchy who wish to make an example out of the Doctor. But to Mew's credit, he didn't rise to such heights for nothing, and so, just as he did with King Cold, he quickly offers himself up as a valuable asset. Thanks to his knowledge of the universe's criminal community, as well as his access to Cold Force secrets and resources, he is able to strike a deal in which he will work for the Patrol in exchange for his freedom. Not to mention, his being the last of a nearly sane exterminated race also helps his case when it comes to the last remaining hero of the rebellion's old guard, the newly crowned Galactic Patrol King Vegeta. After also being persuaded to rat out a few of his more questionable scientific former allies like Goichi or Dr. Raichi, the former rebels accept these terms, and so Dr. Mew is finally allowed to begin his repensatory work as the Galactic Patrol's chief scientist. However, this is where Bobbity's mark comes into play, as the glyph is revealed to be an exact copy of Bobbity's consciousness, now dwelling inside Mew's mind. Though the wizard sought to simply override the Doctor, he quickly finds that Mew's will is far too strong for true possession, and so the wizard and scientists are forced to come to an agreement in order to coexist within the same mind. Thankfully, there is one area in which they are in total agreement: revenge. Neither Bobbity nor Mew like the shape of this new galaxy under the rebels. Too peaceful, sickeningly noble, and mind-numbingly boring. So both sorcerer and scientist find camaraderie in a shared abhorrence of the stagnant and uneventful lifestyle of a peaceful universe, leaving only one solution: a monster, the likes of which Supreme Kai mentioned, a Majin which will truly wreak lasting and universe-changing devastation. However, this beast will have to be different than any that has come before, neither purely machine nor magic, but instead a perfect hybrid, with a potential far exceeding any Saiyan or even the mutants of the Cold Dynasty. As such, the dastardly duo set to their work, utilizing both their skill sets for the new project. Even so, the pair cannot devote as much time as they would like to it, since while Mew is a free man in name, he is still under surveillance from the Galactic Patrol, and at their whim must create new inventions for them, such as a specialized stasis prison cell to house the Saiyan mutant war criminal Kakarot. Through studying him, Bobbity becomes tempted to make him the base of their new weapon, but Mew will not entertain the thought. His hatred for Saiyans greater than ever after the months he spent as their prisoner. And admittedly, this being, even while under very heavy forceful sedation, gives off a vibe that makes them feel uneasy at the mere thought of impeding his will. And so as we come to know, Kakarot is only confined as per the Patrol's orders, and bought a bit more trust due to his speedy and efficient work, Mew is at last able to continue his secret experiments. Years pass, and between the strain of the Galactic Patrol's constant monitoring of him, the effort of evading detection while he works on the project, the sheer mental challenge of creating the new life form, and the fatigue of harboring two minds within one brain, Dr. Mew quickly begins to degenerate, his blue skin graying, his once thick orange hair falling out, and even his cybernetic eyes losing some of their luster. He is a shell of his former self by the time they have created the perfect body for their new life form, his baby.
and at last is able to turn to his partner in Bobby to finish what they have started. Over the course of several more months of hard work, the wizard is able to enchant the baby's body and imbue it with magical powers that even exceed its creators, until at last it is ready for the final touch. On a moonless night deep underground in Mew and Bobby's secret sublab, the wizard uses the final remnants of his magic ability to open a portal, though not just any portal, a portal to the deepest depths of hell. With a mighty cry of para para, Bobby calls forth one of the abyss's denizens, a being of pure primordial evil not dissimilar from the original Majin Buu, and binds it inside the baby's body. Mew, in a voice distinctly all his own, cheers at their success, but a quickly fatiguing Bobby greedily claims their need to press on. Their goal is to make something more dangerous than Buu, then one is not nearly enough, and so he repeats the spell over and over, each time at the cost of another fragment of his and Mew's thankfully shared life force and sanity. A grand total of 107 more times the spell is cast, until at last the body cannot hold any more pure malice. The cost is obviously great, as though it has only been 6.5 years since this project began. The body of Dr. Mew seems to have aged nearly 70, but as Mew and Bobby stare up into the eyes of their creation, they know it is all worth it. At last, they have given birth to this perfect monstrosity, their baby Buu. Blinking and flexing its fingers as if unfamiliar with corporal reality, Baby Buu peers curiously at its surroundings, and then, with a sound like nails on a chalkboard, like homes burning, like children crying, it laughs maniacally. Mew and Bobby laugh with it, and only now does Baby Buu notice his creators. In its horrific voice, it speaks both their names, showing its magic allows it to see two minds in the one man, and it then tells its fathers that it is almost ready. Mew asks what it is almost ready for, and the monster replies like a child excited for play: devastation. However, it needs one last thing from its creators first. Eagerly, Mew says he will give it anything. Baby Buu needs only name it, and this makes the creature laugh, as he says it's very simple. He needs their love. Then, quick as a flash, the tube of amniotic fluid the creature has called home for its short life explodes out, causing Mew to cover his face as its ribcage bursts open, becoming like fingers which wrap around Mew's decrepit body and pull him slowly closer to his monster, as if to embrace him. As darkness consumes him, Mew is not afraid, even as he recognizes that Bobby's consciousness has finally faded and left him alone for the first time in nearly a decade. Instead, an elation the likes of which he has never known overwhelms him. His entire life he has sought greatness through his creations, but only now as he becomes part of a larger euphoric whole does he finally understand what true greatness is. And so, the reign of Baby Buu begins, bent on only destruction and assimilation. The perfect life form begins making its way from world to world, seeking to plague the entire universe. Naturally, their respective heroes try to defend their homes, but few can resist the call of Baby Buu, and as each of them falls, the demon uses its inherited necromantic magic to raise them as its thralls, and turn them against their former allies. Now imbued with a fragment of its virus-like ki. Obviously, even the Kais cannot ignore such a menace, and so Shin wisely is the one to make the initial decision that outside aid will be needed, and he prepares to go to the Galactic Patrol for it. But it is clear that with every soul consumed by the Necromancer, Baby Buu's intelligence and cunning grow along with his power. Case in point, knowledge from Bobby alerts the Plague to the fact that Shin technically presents his largest threat, and so seeks him out as first priority. The Supreme Kai is little more than a minor irritant to the Eldritch Abomination, and so, on the surface of the planet of the Kais, the ruler of the universe sends his attendant Kibito away as a last hope, and breathes his last, and thus with him dies the god of destruction of Universe 7, Lord Beerus, perhaps the only being who could surely dispose of Mew and Bobby's malevolent creation without issue. Fleeing elsewhere to a currently barren and lifeless planet once called Namek that had been caught up in the war between the Rebellion and the Cold Empire, Kibito, now the Supreme Kai in his own right, is forced to consider new ways to destroy this menace once and for all. Lest his friend have died in vain, and Lord Zeno take matters into his own hands and erase this universe simply to be rid of what may prove to be a multiversal plague. With his options thin on the ground, Kibito's mind goes to the tales he once heard of a Saiyan, a warrior who destroyed both Frieza and his father King Cold through sheer grit, hatred, and savagery. If such a fighter still exists out in the universe, they may be Universe 7's last and only hope. And so, this is where we find our hero, even as he denies the title, claiming instead that he will kill anyone who threatens his universe. Zabel and the other members of the Galactic Patrol then give him a rundown of his targets, as well as the plan to form a team of warriors to assist Kakarot in his battle against Baby Buu. But the scarred Saiyan gruffly shrugs this off, saying such hangers-on will only slow him down. However, there is a hint of something beneath this gruff exterior that suggests to Zabel that perhaps his reluctance is not entirely based in pragmatism. Nevertheless, the patrolman presses the issue, saying that he wasn't asking Kakarot's permission, since
since these fighters will be there as a countermeasure to him just as much as Baby Boo admittedly, should he lose control again. But this only earns a bark of mirthless laughter from Kakarot, as the influence of Broly's spirit residing in him grants our fallen hero knowledge unearned as well. So he places a pair of fingers to his head and vanishes with a wild grin. Zabel's eyes widen beneath his helmet, and while cursing something about Kakarot still being a rambunctious idiot, he scrambles after with a much more practiced instant transmission. Still being in a relatively weakened state though, Kakarot can't get very far, only hopping to the nearest strong power as a way to prove that Zabel and his lackeys do not have him on as tight a leash as they might think. And so he finds himself in a different part of the prison complex, as all around him lights and a ruckus roar to signify his prison break. This aggravates the Saiyan's already pounding head, and he responds with a feral roar of his own, hurling a ki blast which destroys the nearest siren and finally earns him a little quiet. Unfortunately, this silence is short-lived, as a voice angrily barks at him to knock it off. Spinning around, he sees that he is in what seems to be a reception area, where a patrol woman is nervously demanding he put his hands up, while between her and Kakarot is another man, a humanoid with green hair, who is also giving the Saiyan a piercing look with his one uncovered eye, as he tells him to do as the patrol woman said. Smirking, Kakarot asks her what, to which the stranger dryly answers or he'll put a hole through the Saiyan's head. Sauntering towards him in interest, the scarred Saiyan says the other man wouldn't dare, but he is promptly proved wrong as without hesitation, the green-haired man levels a finger gun and fires a concentrated bolt of ki. With a perfect bullseye, Kakarot stumbles backwards, and without waiting to see him fall, the green-haired stranger looks back at the receptionist.
Sorry about the noise, by the way. Did that oaf have a bounty? No, but if you want money, I've got a job, and you seem perfect for it.
To the green-haired man's shock, the voice is coming from directly behind him, and whipping round, he sees Kakarot smirking down at him, seemingly unfazed. With a chuckle, the Saiyan then spits the ki bolt back at his attacker's feet, where it fizzles away, and before the other can act, he grabs him by the shirt and teleports both of them out of the room, just as Zabel arrives, having nearly caught up. The pair then reappear in the briefing room Kakarot had initially teleported away from, much to the shock of Mirrors and angering a soon-returning Zabel. The Saiyan warmonger then says if he has to have babysitters, he wants this guy to be one of them, as he shoves the green-haired man forward, since he at least has the killer instinct he knows they're gonna need. As a professional courtesy, Zabel asks the newcomer if he's alright, but the eye-patched man shrugs it off, all business as he correctly surmises that what Kakarot just pulled was a test, and he assumes he passed. He then asks for details on this job, namely its pay, and so Jocko and Zabel continue their explanation, telling Kakarot and the stranger whose name he soon learns is Granolah that Baby Boo has already brought 2/3 of the universe to ruin.
Including my home planet Cereal, I've seen it firsthand. All my friends and even my enemies are just pawns in his game now.
Jocko muses that this is indeed a rough break, while Zabel says the reports from patrollers have confirmed this, and it seems the only way to kill Baby Boo's thralls is complete and total disintegration. Not only that, but they do not require food or rest, and through what seems to be a hive mind, they can share knowledge, so that the same trick can never work against them twice. Kakarot nods, seeing now why they had to resort to him for his raw power, and why one man probably can't take on this threat alone. So like it or not, he'll swallow his pride and work with the team, but in exchange, he wants to be able to pick his squad mates like he did with Granolah. Angrily, Zabel says they never even agreed to let him have Granolah, or even do that, and reminds the Saiyan that he's not exactly in a position to bargain. However, Agent Mirrors, who up until now has remained mostly silent, tells his captain that he thinks what Kakarot is proposing is fair.
We're asking him to risk his life. He should at least have the right to know those fighting beside him are up to the task of watching his back.
Well, at least you get it.
Fine, but no more prison breaks. We've got enough to deal with already.
Kakarot grins that he thought Zabel would see things his way, and though the helmeted patrolman wants to sigh again with exasperation, he bites his tongue and instead tells Mirrors to join him in giving Kakarot a tour of potential teammates. The next hour is spent going cell to cell, as Kakarot inspects each prisoner the Galactic Patrol has managed to apprehend during the last 7 years. Most are nothing more than 2-bit crooks who will be nothing but fodder in the face of Baby Boo, with the most interesting of them being one of Goichi's mechanical creations designated OG-731, or 7-3 for short. However, even he is not up to snuff, with his only real abilities being basic mimicry, and the fact that close-range fighters will be at an inherent disadvantage against their opponent does not help his case. This frustrates Kakarot, who declares that he'll have better luck assessing prisoners without Zabel and Mirrors breathing down his neck. Before either can stop him, he puts one hand on Granolah and the other back to his forehead, vanishing once more, causing Zabel to once again fume. Slowly gaining a better handle on his teleportation ability now, Kakarot seeks out the strongest power in the prison other than him, one that he feels like he recognizes, almost like he's seen it before in a dream. The cell Kakarot and Granolah appear in is pitch black, much like his own had been, and filled with the heavy stenches of sulfur and unwashed hair, though neither of these interest Kakarot half as much as the sound of clopping hoofbeats, followed by the rattle of heavy chains to signify that the source of power is getting closer. From the darkness, a deep and ragged voice then asks,
"Is that you, Master Chef?"
As Kakarot and Granola's adjusting eyes finally fall upon a large, blue, goat-like humanoid. Sensing the raw evil coming off this stranger, they both instinctively take on defensive positions.
Chef?
You cook? What? No. Am I supposed to know what that means?
I suppose not. You were, after all, in Dreamland last we met.
Quit with the riddles or we'll leave you here to rot. Who are you?
I'm known as Moro, the World Eater, and several years back I was tasked with being your executioner.
Kakarot scoffs at this, admitting Moro is strong, but he doubts the goat could kill him even on his best day, a claim Moro agrees with, sardonically asking if the fact that he is not dead is a big enough clue to that fact. He then continues that his particular method of execution is ki absorption, saying that he can devour worlds without breaking a sweat, but for some reason, he could not even consume half of Kakarot's delicious ki before he reached his limit, even comparing the taste to the greatest dessert ever, yet complaining that such a delicacy obviously wreaks havoc on one's figure, and he doesn't exactly get much of a chance to exercise. Hence his new diet of consuming the fate amounts of the Saiyan's ki, which was used to power the prison from afar in moderation. This makes Granolah gag, but Kakarot smirks that Moro shouldn't underestimate the power of a Saiyan, much less one like him. However, Moro countermands that this can't be it, suggesting that Kakarot might have some sort of mutation, since he would have no trouble consuming someone like Captain Zabel in one go. A little surprised, Kakarot asks if Zabel really is a Saiyan, to which Moro replies that he certainly is, and that is not the only secret he knows. If Kakarot, his dear master chef, would be so kind as to give him another taste of that delicious and bountiful ki, he would be happy to share all that he knows. Looking to Granolah with a faint grin, while the Cerulean glares back with a "you can't be serious" expression, Kakarot says that he's not looking for secrets, though he believes Moro could provide a far more valuable service.
Bad idea. Guys shoved this deep into this hellhole can only be one thing: scum.
And so was I. Did you think we were looking for heroes in a place like this?
This banter has piqued the goat's interest, and in his rumbling voice, he asks what exactly this service is, with Kakarot replying that he's assembling a crew to take down an even greater galactic threat than him. Cracked lips splitting in a grin, Moro admits that he would be open to this, if only to ensure that his favorite meal is not taken away from him. Viewing this as satisfactory, Kakarot extends a hand, and as the blinding light of the cell door opening bathes the cramped room, Moro clasps it, forging their pact. Growling with annoyance, Zabel demands to know what Kakarot is doing with a death row inmate, but with something like mirth in his tone, the strange Saiyan replies,
"Recruiting my last teammate. Come on, it's about time we make a battle plan."
Back in the meeting room where Kakarot was initially briefed on his mission, he, Jocko, Miris, Zabel, Granolah, and Moro set to work on forming a strategy for how to destroy Baby Boo, though two primary problems faced them. The first is finding the monstrosity among his unending horde of undead thralls, and the second is how they intend to kill him when they do, considering how his power is said to exceed even King Cold at his peak and apparently grows with every conquest. Cracking his knuckles nonchalantly, Kakarot tells the group not to worry about that second problem, since he believes between them all, they should have the strength to obliterate Baby Boo, which means all they have to do is find him. A gruff male voice announces from out of view that he can help with that, before a trio of aliens flash into the room. Two of them are male, both purple-skinned, with one being tall and lean, while the other is short, stocky, and possesses long, pointed ears. In between them stands a tall, blue-skinned female with long white hair pulled up into a ponytail. Miris recognizes two of them, and so stays silent as Jocko and Zabel rise to their feet, ordering these intruders to identify themselves. Angrily, the stocky, long-eared alien demands to know if this is how they talk to a god, while beside him the woman chortles that they can't hardly be blamed for not recognizing him, when he seldom shows himself to mortals of his own universe, let alone the Sevenths. This causes the fat cat to snarl that it sounds like his attendant is calling him lazy, but the woman smiles that at least he isn't also dense. Meanwhile, the tall alien who was the original speaker clears his throat, forcing the bickering pair to turn their attention back to the room at large where all eyes are on them. A little flustered, the cat introduces himself as Champa, god of destruction, and the woman beside him as his angel attendant Vados, and they are the deities of their sister universe and an ally in these dark times. Smiling, Jocko says that this is great. A god of destruction could kill Baby Boo in no time flat. But Champa balks at the idea, saying strong that he won't be setting foot in the same quadrant as that abomination, and mumbling that no vengeance is worth dirtying himself over. After a pause, the god regains his bravado, and asserts especially not for stupid old Beerus. No, his support comes in the form of his compatriot Hit, who he has hired to assassinate Baby Boo for him, at great personal expense might he add. Smirking while ignoring her master's sentimental reasons, Vados says that it's better than the alternative though. And when the patrollers, prisoners, and bounty hunter cock their heads questioningly, she elaborates that Lord Champa is being quite generous by equipping them with the greatest assassin from their universe. But that is only because he knows that if Baby Boo is not dealt with quickly and cleanly, the Omni King will dispose of both their universes for good measure, as to not damage the balance of the multiverse. This only causes more confusion, but Kakarot in his usual blunt way is able to cut through the formalities, simply looking at Hit and in a challenging tone asking if he can fight. An instant later, without seemingly moving an inch, the assassin is now in front of him, having attempted to bury his fist deep in the Saiyan's gut. However, thanks to future vision, the Saiyan is able to catch the blow by the wrist just in the nick of time.
Impossible, unless you can...
See the future? Yeah, it's not too fun though. I like your trick better, so you can tag along.
Turning back to his little warband, Kakarot wistfully thinks that he's never had a team this big, before pushing the thought away and asking Hit how he can help them find Baby Boo.
I've made a centuries-long career out of finding men who desperately don't want to be found. I'd like to see all the data you have on this Baby Boo.
Jocko, having heard of how terrible God of Destruction's wrath can be, decides that he will give Champa's envoy anything he desires, and so leads the man over to a computer terminal to go through records. Meanwhile, Zabel and Mears make their way over to Champa and Vados for more information, while Kakarot returns to sit with Granolah and Moro, acting as a bit of a circuit breaker between their evident distaste for each other. After Champa becomes fed up from fielding Zabel's questions about the Omni King and multiversal threats, and Vados finishes what appears to be a rather serious conversation with Mears, who, as evidenced by their hugging, seem to be more familiar with each other than the first appearances would convey, the deities depart, wishing the heroes luck, and a few minutes later, Hit emerges from his research, saying that he has a strong hunch where Baby Boo is going to strike next. The group of warriors comprising of Kakarot, Mears, Jocko, Zabel, Moro, Granolah, and now Hit then board a Galactic Patrol spacecraft and make haste for a planet called Kabocha on Hit's recommendation. During the flight, Zabel insists that Kakarot and Moro be restrained, but Kakarot simply destroys his cuffs by flaring his aura the second they are on him, to show the patrolman once more that any notions he may have of control only exist by the grace of Kakarot himself, even going so far as to snap Moro's shackles for him as well. This causes the ride to be quite tense, and after about an hour, they finally reach the planet, but to their horror already see the signs of Baby Boo's devastation etched into the land like a scar. Not bothering to wait for his allies, Kakarot teleports to the surface in curiosity, where he is greeted by a level of carnage unseen even during the war. The battle is already over, as a mountain of dead line the streets, while the only ones moving are a shambling mass of aliens. When they sense Kakarot, the denizens of this planet unnervingly turn as one to face him. But as they make eye contact, there is no sign of malice. Instead, they smile. The nearest alien to the Saiyan then speaks up, a small girl, though her voice carries the weight of billions of lifetimes, as she asks Kakarot if he has come to join them. Scowling, Kakarot tells her as if, before demanding to know where Baby Boo is. Still smiling, the girl replies that they are all Baby Boo, and he could be too if he would just reconsider, since it's ever so peaceful and feels so nice.
Oh, Kakarot, we've been waiting for you. Have you come to join us?
Fat chance! I'm just here to kill Baby Boo. Where's that coward hiding?
Silly Billy, we're all Baby Boo. And you could be too. Ask yourself, wouldn't you like to experience true peace?
Gritting his teeth at this disgusting mockery of actual freedom, Kakarot barks that he gave up on experiencing peace a long time ago, before demanding once more that they bring forth Baby Boo, the real Baby Boo, so he can kick his ass and end this farce. Sighing, the girl says it's a real shame he won't choose peace, but it's no matter, since he'll know it all the same.
You poor thing, you can't even see how ridiculous you're being. No matter, you will soon.
She then lunges at him, with the other infected doing likewise, and not a moment is lost in communication, as they are all in perfect sync. But even a well-organized group of ants are still just bugs at the end of the day. Raising both hands to prove this, Kakarot heartlessly fires off a volley of ki blasts, which blow away the girl and other attackers without any trouble. However, despite taking what would be mortal blows for living beings, they are nothing more than minor irritants to some of the undead who are not completely destroyed by his attack. Once more, Kakarot blows them away, this time creatively stopping his approach to manifesting massive heart-like hands in the shape of the Uzarus out of his ki, and using them to smash, squish, and clap the horde into submission from afar. But once more they rise, over and over again, until Kakarot, who is still not back to his peak state, begins to flag. And with creatures such as this, all they need is the slightest advantage. Taking a microsecond too long to charge his signature two-stage Gyoza gun, a wave of undead grapple his arm, dragging him down as another mass take the other arm, and a third group pin his body to the ground, causing the scarred Saiyan to roar in fury while using his raw aura to burn his opponents away. But he can barely make a dent in the piles, with more infected taking their place, and ensuring that he is truly trapped while only wasting his energy. A new speaker, a long-headed squid-like alien, then steps into view.
Oh, Kakarot! Poor sweet Kakarot! Even now you rage and storm against inner peace in the misguided belief that glory can be found in rugged individualism. You will be so much more as part of a larger whole, as a part of me.
Kakarot growls to spare him the speeches and get on with whatever he's gonna do, which earns a sad headshake from the new mouthpiece of Baby Boo, as he creates a small yet somehow corrupted looking orb of ki above a tentacle. Two more of the thralls then grab Kakarot's jaws, forcing them open as the speaker crouches down to force feed the Saiyan his ki.
Quit fighting it. You'll love being a part of our family.
Family? No, his family died fighting monsters like this. And with that revelation, Kakarot lets out a scream that shakes the very planet, as from his gigantic roar, a massive mouth beam similar to his mentor's break cannon reduces the squid and a large part of the horde to dust. As in the corner of his eye, the Saiyan sees something materialize. It is Zabel, with the rest of the group, having finally locked onto Kakarot's ki while fighting their own horde of thralls. An instant transmission to him to regroup. Briefly vanishing, Hit reappears in front of the thralls, pinning Kakarot's left side down, and in the next instant, all bear the evidence of powerfully quick yet precise blows, resulting in the damage needed to sever the connection with Baby Boo and knock him away, but while conserving excess power and not destroying the bodies completely. While Miris, Zabel, and Granolah use a volley of blasts to clear away the pile of corpses pinning Kakarot's right arm, as well as to provide cover fire to keep their squad from being overrun as he was. When the Saiyan has a little bit of movement, he throws a mighty punch, sending those still clinging to him flying, and to keep them from coming back, the World Eater appears next to Kakarot and manipulates the planet's energy like a geyser of light that bursts from the ground to obliterate the horde, though this very obviously fatigues him. But shaking this off, Moro then grabs the extended arm and pulls his beloved Master Chef to his feet, asking in a tone that Kakarot could almost mistake for genuine concern if he's alright. Kakarot in turn surprisingly nods with a grateful smile, apologizing for getting in over his head. He then tells the others that he doesn't think the real Baby Boo is here, since if it was, it would have spoken to him directly rather than using vessels. Hit, Granolah, and Miris all agree, saying they should fall back, but Zabel and Moro disagree, with the goat wanting to stay a bit longer so that he can consume the remainder of the world's ki to replenish his strength, while the helmeted Saiyan believes they can still win this fight if they do it together. Sneering, Kakarot barks that the patroller knows if they stick around longer, they'll die here, but Zabel coldly retorts that death is only scary when the thing most precious to a person is themselves, causing Kakarot to snarl, as that sickening righteousness reminds him of someone. Though Zabel ignores this and lets out a war cry, as he uses a dirty fireworks to incinerate another large swath of enemies. Unfortunately, it also draws the ire of every other thrall, and as the patroller attempts to replicate the feat, their foes are able to collectively marshal enough ki to endure it. Scowling, Granolah reminds Zabel of their hive mind and adaptability, plus the fact that now they've exhausted their trump card, so they really should just go. But the mysterious Saiyan snaps back that he can't just leave this world enslaved, not after all he's lost to see the galaxy be freed. But Miris consolingly tells his captain that there will be another chance, for now he has to live the fight another day, otherwise all he'll be doing is adding to Baby Boo's strength. Sighing, Zabel accepts this, and so with a heavy heart, orders the group to fall back, causing Kakarot, Zabel, and Miris each take hold of their allies and use instant transmission to lock on to Jaco's humble power, returning them to the ship. As the defeated warband slump to the ground, Kakarot eyes Zabel coldly.
What are you looking at?
I'm wondering if you really are Vegeta under that helmet.
This caused the whole ship to fall silent, with everyone here knowing that name and the legacy that comes with it. With his own sneer, Zabel asks what it matters. They're here to fight a war, not reminisce about the last one. Then without another word, he takes his place in the pilot's chair, pulling their ship out of orbit. No one even bothers to restrain Kakarot or Moro this time, with each warrior too engulfed in their own thoughts. Finally, after a long pause, Hit asks the patrollers where they are going. Zabel states as if obvious, back to base, so they can get better gear for the next fight. But Miris tentatively suggests that their equipment might not be the issue. Baby Boo is so insidious because of its perfect unity, while during that last fight, they were, well, frankly sloppy. What they need is time to familiarize themselves with each other's strengths and fighting styles. Hit gruffly states that as an authority on the subject, time is a resource they are sorely lacking right now, but Miris smiles that he might know where they can get a little more. Slowly coming to the same epiphany, Zabel asks if he means that world, and Miris nods, reminding its being uninhabited would make it a low priority for the necromancer. Convinced, the captain punches in the coordinates, and the ship jumps away. The world in question is a barren one, with the only sign of its lost civilization being a lone pyramid. Miris tells his allies that this is their destination, and so the group all head inside, only to find that the space beyond the pyramid's antechamber is an endless white void. Grinning, the purple patroller tells them that in this place, 3 days pass in the time it takes one to pass outside, meaning they can effectively triple the efficiency of their training. Not to mention, due to this being a different dimension altogether, it will hide them from their enemy, and it also has a magically replenishing supply of food for those amongst them who should need such a thing. From here, a period of training ensues. However, everyone still gains something. Firstly, Kakarot, who upon getting an open space to exercise in and decent food, finally begins to feel as if he is returning to his full strength. And having not done so for nearly a decade, the time to learn how to act on a team again is also crucial for him. Miris and Zabel train together closely, with the captain seemingly trying to learn that same autonomous dodging technique as his friend, though they seem to come to a conclusion that this is not an ability his analytical mind is well suited for, instead focusing on trying to catch up to Kakarot, who lights a mighty fire beneath just about everyone. Moro is forced to learn a more efficient way to fight with allies while not draining their energy, to compensate for his being unable to do so against their foes lest he become a thrall himself. though the time with Kakarot, and even Granolah to an extent, seems well spent, as his aloofness begins to melt in what appears to be genuine camaraderie, while the sniper actually finds Hit as an amazing mentor to improve his critical point lock-on techniques, as well as help him practice against a foe whose speed he can't hope to match. The assassin is, however, sure to get a few spars in with Kakarot, as he refuses to believe his time skip can be predicted, slowly but surely pushing both their time-based abilities to higher heights. This becomes the trend. As he grows more jovial through this, Kakarot lends himself as an aid to everyone's training, doing what he can to help them as Broly would have. Like teaching Granolah to throw a proper punch to help him in close quarters combat, or Moro his new key construct technique by allowing him to eat them, giving Hit the simple advice of adding feints to some of his attacks when he is unsure if they will be truly one-shots, and even aiding Miras and Zabel's training by giving the helmet to Saiyan another superior sparring partner to test himself against, and vent some of that pent-up frustration, as he knows all too well how limiting it can be. And through doing this, he begins to almost recognize his ki. Finally, at the end of 3 months on the inside, and thus a month on the outside, the Warband feel powered up and synchronized, thus are ready to take a second swing at Baby Boo. However, after all their intensive training, their clothes and equipment are more than a little worn down, and so it is decided that first they will return to the Galactic Patrol prison to restock before trying to find Baby Boo's next target, because even now, as they begin to easily deal with the hordes they run into along the way, their growing frequency is troubling. However, to their horror, this second task proves utterly unnecessary, as when they land at the prison, everything is eerily quiet, with the usual sound of patrollers and technical staff chatting as they work being completely absent. Wanting to break the tense silence, Jocko asks one of the technicians if he's working hard or hardly working, but when they respond with the same sing-song serenity that Kakarot heard from Baby Boo's vessel, the Saiyan doesn't hesitate to vaporize the tech.
What the hell was that for?
It's already been here.
As shock crosses the faces of the patrollers and the team, Moro nods that the Master Chef is right, since just like on Kabocha, he can't drain anyone's ki here. While Granolah concurs, taking a quick scan and reminding that he can see everyone's ki, and all the people here have that same nasty sludgy sword is back on Kabocha as well.
Very perceptive. Too bad you still lack the wisdom to see that being a part of me isn't something to be feared.
The speaker then reveals himself to be 7-3, the android that Kakarot had previously dismissed to be a part of his crew.
So what do you say? Come on, you'll love it.
Granolah tells the android that he can shove that idea up his tin can ass, and when the others confirm that the Cerulean does speak for all of them in this matter, 7-3 sighs deeply, while transmitting an order to attack through the hive mind. From seemingly every nook and cranny of the landing pad, patrollers, technicians, and prisoners alike spring forth, moving first to destroy our hero's ship to prevent a unified escape, before turning their attention to divide and conquer Kakarot and Co. Knowing that their only choice is to fight, the group go instinctively back to back to protect one another as well as the mostly helpless Jocko. Sizing up their various opponents, it doesn't take long to figure out that 7-3 poses the most pressing issue. Being familiar with his power duplication ability, it is decided the long-range fighters like Granolah and Zabel should focus on him, leaving the rest of the crew to fend off the remaining horde. And with these thralls being made up mostly of former rebels trained by Broly and Vegeta themselves, they are objectively the most powerful undead the crew have faced so far, making them thankful their training has given them their own unity. Unfortunately for them, 7-3 cannot be blown away as simply as the other thralls, and so, taking a sprinter's position, he rushes at them. Urgently, Zabel tells his allies not to let 7-3 touch their necks, since that's how he absorbs powers, with Kakarot scoffing that this is why he didn't pick the copycat, before leaping up and delivering a vicious spin kick to the droid's cranium. This is enough to send 7-3 flying into a pack of the thralls, but he is not down, rising to his feet moments later with infinite energy, and ruthlessly tearing his corpse allies apart to hurl at Kakarot and cover his next speedy rush. Kakarot, though being a wily one, ignores the gore flung at him, and waits until his foe is close before placing 2 fingers to his forehead and vanishing out of view. A second later, he reappears directly behind 7-3, wrapping him in a full Nelson and yelling to his comrades to blast the bot while he's got him restrained. However, instead of praising Kakarot, Zabel curses him for a fool, as with a whirring noise, 7-3 bends his mechanical shoulder in a way no organic being could, and clasps a hand squarely on the nape of his captor's neck. On his center forehead gem, a small image of Kakarot appears, and at once the android's posture changes, becoming more feral and unmistakably like Kakarot's. 7-3 then swings his head backwards, smashing his chrome dome into Kakarot's nose and forcing the Saiyan to recoil, before placing 2 mechanical fingers to his forehead and vanishing. Furiously, Zabel warns his allies that 7-3 has copied Kakarot, meaning he now has his abilities and strength. A claim which the android is eager to prove right as he reappears between him and Granolah, grabbing each of them by the napes and absorbing their powers as well. However, 7-3 chooses to keep Kakarot's portrait front and center as he slams the warriors' heads together before dropping them and is transitioning away, now being forced to keep up these hit and run tactics to buy time, as the warband's efficient teamwork has already decimated Baby Boo's small and inconspicuous ambush force. 7-3's next target is the group of close-range fighters, with him materializing behind them like he did to Granolah and Zabel. Lashing out a hand, he goes first for Miras, but as luck would have have it, the purple patroller is able to dodge the attack before he can even see it, almost like his body has a mind of its own. Not wanting to waste time on a difficult target, 7-3 switches to Moro, who uses the skills he learned in the time chamber to fire a blast at him. Sadly, the GOAT is no match for someone possessing Kakarot's power, and so 7-3 merely bats this away before going for the throat. However, before he can steal Moro's strength as well, Hit time skips between them, delivering a chop to one of the bot's arms to sever it, and thus rob him of his memory on one side, before the android retreats in concern. This at last looks like a winning strategy, as Hit is now able to use his own hit-and-run tactics to keep 7-3 from touching him or any of his other allies. But unfortunately, there is one thing the assassin from Universe 6 fails to consider, that each set of eyes of the defeated corpse is on him as another thrall analyzing his movement pattern, and sharing it with the hive mind to allow 7-3 to predict where he'll be next. With the combined efforts of everyone and the accumulated fighting knowledge of hundreds of species, it takes less than a dozen skips before the thralls of Baby Boo have mapped his pattern. As Hit next leaps in, 7-3 is ready, and so dropping low, uses his legs to trip the assassin, before holding him down using Kakarot's raw strength. This neutralizes his ability to skip away, and with a single movement, 7-3 has Hit's powers as well. As this happens, the heroes of Universe 7 watch as Zabel's portrait disappears from the gym, being replaced by the assassin. Thankfully, this gives Moro as the craftiest among them an idea, as he creates shackles made from the planet's key to slow down the android. Calling out to Granolah, he tells the Cerulean to target the gems on 7-3's head, since it seems they not only display whose power is held, but also houses them, meaning that if they destroy them, they'll also remove those powers and prevent 7-3 from replacing them. Granolah nods, and so attempts to snipe the crystals from afar, but unfortunately 7-3 is already on the move, targeting Moro now, not to copy him, but to silence him as the team's strategic coordinator. Switching to Hit's powers, the android time skips in front of the GOAT, then rotating to Granolah's, he raises a finger and jabs it out, clearly aiming for a vital point. However, this grand plan is thwarted by Jocko of all people, as in an attempt to look cool, the cowardly patrol king bravely leaps in front of Moro and takes the hit just below the shoulder, enduring the pain to fire his blaster, which shatters the gem containing Hit's powers. As his new wound bursts from a delayed key charge, Jocko hits the ground, while Granolah used this chance to unload with both hands on 7-3's head now that he can't time skip to avoid the attacks, destroying the crystal with his own face on it and even Kakarot's before dropping the now headless android in a heap. Afterwards, Granolah surveys the battlefield, pleased to see that while he dealt with 7-3, the rest of the warband dispatched the few remaining thralls. They all now stand around Jocko, who is still lying where he fell when 7-3's attack pierced his arm. Joining them, the sniper asks what's happened, and wordlessly, Kakarot points to Jocko's wound, which is taken on an infected look. The bug-eyed patroller then speaks for himself, saying that when 7-3 hit him, he implanted some of his ki into him, meaning that soon, he'll be a thrall just like all those other poor souls. Solemnly, Zabel suggests that if they remove the rest of the arm, they might be able to stop the plague from spreading, but Jocko shakes his head, saying that this is only a guess, and if they did, he wouldn't be of much use to them with only one arm. Better to let the infection spread and take him, so that he can get a glimpse into the hive mind before he dies. If he does this, he should be able to tell them where the real Baby Boo is hiding.
You'll still die. It's the responsibility of a super elite to die in the line of duty, if it will protect the galaxy. Finding Baby Boo is how I do that. I'm not strong like you guys.
He looks fondly upon his two colleagues and makes one last request, that when they have what they need, destroy his body. He would much rather die as himself than live as one of that monster's toys. Swallowing heavily, Zabel gives his answer.
I promise.
With his faith bolstered, Jocko at last stops resisting Baby Boo's pull, and from the point of the injury, necrotic black veins begin spreading out all over Jocko's pale blue skin.
What do you see?
But at first, all Jocko can do is writhe and groan, the process of assimilation clearly being an agonizing one, despite what the thralls claimed. Clasping one of his friend's hands, Zabel orders Jocko to stay strong, to remember his duty, and this at least seems to get through, as through a voice that is half gasp and half sing-song, he replies,
Pink skies, many moons, sacred. The sacred world of the Kais, of course.
Though Jocko is now in too much pain to speak, he nods before his head lolls and his bug eyes go glassy. Wasting no time, lest Jocko rise as a thrall, Zabel fires a blast which disintegrates the fallen king's body, before saying a quiet word of thanks to his comrade. Even Kakarot cannot help but feel great respect for the courage of Jocko's final act, and so, taking hold of Granolah and Moro, while Zabel does Mirrors and Hit, the group instant transmission to what may well be their final destination. There is only one immense power on this world, nearly so large as to appear imperceptible at first, likely a part of their target strategy to hide away and conquer from afar. And as the remaining heroes lay eyes upon the source, none of them have any doubt that this is the original Baby Boo.
Baby Boo! You'll pay for killing my friend!
Silly prince, I didn't kill your friend, you did. All I did was offer him a chance to trade in the humdrum for something way more fun.
Knowing the sort of anger his fellow Saiyan is feeling, Kakarot lays a hand on Zabel's shoulder to stop him from attacking as he tells the demon it's over. He's all alone and they've got him cornered, so he might as well give up and they'll give him a quick death. But Baby Boo laughs once more, a hint of mania to it this time, as en masse, figures begin to materialize behind him. Dozens, hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of faces, all sharing his smirk.
You're so slow on the uptake, I'm never alone. Anyway, that don't matter, since I've seen how you die, monkey guy, and it's gonna be in a grand arena and an awesome blaze of glory.
And just how did you come by this knowledge, demon?
You remember Tulo, right? Turns out his kids took after him in the power department. Did you ever think about having kids, Prince? I mean, before your paramour, well, you know.
Don't you dare talk about how could I'll kill you!
You could try, sure, but my buddies will rip you to pieces before you get within 20 feet of me. Or, and hear me out, we could play a little game. Now doesn't that sound more fun?
What game?
Nothing strenuous, just a little tournament of sorts. The 6 of you against my best champions.
Guessing that's what you mean by a grand arena.
It is. And naturally, all of you will die and become my bestest friends forever and ever. I just want you to have a sporting chance since you're my last hope at entertainment. In this universe, at least.
Fine, but I'm fighting first.
Oh, I hoped you'd say that. I've already picked out an extra special opponent for you.
Raising his hands high, the demon manifests a coliseum clearly made from the bones of countless sapient beings. An arena big enough for his army of death to occupy is a constant reminder of his supremacy. He then softly lifts off the withered ground of this once sacred place, and touches down in a large viewing box bearing twin thrones. With a twitch of his fingers, he beckons Kakarot to join him with the other one. And not wanting to waste any more time, the Saiyan plays along, flying up to the box and taking his seat, a good bit away from Baby Boo. The rest of the warband take positions in the stands, while Zabel moves to one end of the arena to meet his opponent. On the other end, a swirling black vortex opens up, and from it steps a figure most of them know, but none of them had ever expected to see again. Vegeta. Sporting the same dead eyes as the rest of the thralls, there is little else to distinguish him from when he was alive, and as he approaches his foe, he even adopts that same cocky yet heroic grin.
Is this the worthless wretch you called me back to destroy?
Sure is. Oh, Zabby, this must be a nasty shock for you. But don't worry, you'll be joining him as part of my family real soon. That's right, even if I don't kill you, when you're dead, you're mine.
Though this is true, the Plague neglects to mention this ability is at the cost of a significant portion of the warrior's original strength being lost forever, but the despair felt by his prey before joining his happy little family made the loss well worth it. Zabel gives no reply, not even looking at Baby Boo. Instead, his helmeted head is pointed squarely at the Saiyan Prince and former rebel hero. As Vegeta stalks closer, cracking his knuckles, Zabel backs away, a rasp escaping him like he wants to say something, but cannot remember how to speak. Much too soon for Zabel's liking, his back touches up against one of the arena walls.
Pathetic worm, at least face your death head on!
The prince then lunges at Zabel, swinging a punch, but the patrolman remains paralyzed, and so the blow connects, shattering his visor and revealing Tarble? Terror fills Tarble's eyes as he stares up at his big brother, who in turn regards him with a scowl.
I should have figured it was you under that mask. Who else could be such a disappointment?
No, it's not really you.
Oh, but it is.
Sneer deepening, the elder prince drives another fist into his brother's stomach, forcing Tarble to double over in pain.
I've always wanted to do this, you know. Having a weakling for a brother disgusts me. I should have saved myself and let you and that freak Zarbon die.
Tears in his eyes, it looks as though Tarble might actually agree with Vegeta, but Kakarot will not let this stand.
On your feet, Tarble. This isn't just about your pride now, it's about Vegeta's too. That goody-goody would never choose to be a puppet, so it's your duty to destroy him completely and free him.
Tarble whimpers that he doesn't know if he can, but Kakarot yells that he knows he can, speaking to him not as a former prisoner to his captor, or even an uneasy ally in their fight against Baby Boo, but as the friend he once made during the Cold War. Feeling the remnants of this connection stir inside him as well, Tarble nods, then rises to his feet, thrusting a hand forward towards Vegeta's chest, but Vegeta easily catches this.
You're as pitiful a fighter as ever.
Maybe, but I've learned a few tricks since we last fought.
Tarble then brings his other hand up, clapping the heels of his palms together and firing off a point-blank Gallic gun. The purple beam consumes Vegeta, and when it fades, all that is left of him is a gloved hand gripping Tarble's wrist. And moments later, that too vanishes into black smoke.
Please, find peace, big brother.
Up above, Kakarot taunts that Baby Boo better have a better fighter lined up for him, since it would be boring if his battle was over that quick. Baby Boo cackles that the Saiyan need not worry, since he has tailored each fight to be a deeply personal experience for all the combatants, making the Saiyan growl at the dirty trick. He then offers Kakarot a dish of candies, but the long-haired fighter declines, wrinkling his nose and saying they smell like corpses. The demon then shrugs that is because up until very recently they were, before lazily tossing a handful of them into his mouth and telling Granolah that he wants to see him fight next. Granolah looks up to Kakarot, and upon receiving a nod to play along, tags out with Tarble. At first, when Kakarot sees who Granolah is going to fight, he thinks it is some twisted version of himself, but upon closer inspection realizes it most certainly isn't. Granolah seems to gawk at the sight, before turning his eyes back to Kakarot as if finally piecing something together, before suddenly resolving himself as his ki flares to life stronger than ever.
So you grew up, huh, kid? And up there, that's my son, isn't it?
This is for my mother!
And with that, Granolah raises both hands and begins to unleash a ferocious volley of ki blasts at a shocking speed, quickly obscuring Bardock's position due to the dust and smoke kicked up by his attack, and making Granolah grin slightly until Bardock's voice again speaks out.
Your mother? Idiot, do you really think you and that old slug would have survived if I wanted to kill you?
As the dust settles, Bardock, ever rebellious, still stands tall, his body now riddled with holes, as well as his right arm and nearly half his head missing.
You got her killed, not me! I just stuck my neck out for nothing!
The Saiyan then suddenly rushes forward while zigzagging to throw off the start of Granolah's aim, causing the enraged Cerulean to forego his long-range attack and attempt to behead Bardock with the punch Kakarot taught him. However, the undead rebel simply shifts his body slightly so the blow flies harmlessly through one of the already gaping holes the sniper created, allowing Bardock to gruesomely snap Granolah's arm back at the elbow, and causing the younger man to screech in pain. This then creates a second opening for the undead Saiyan, as he wrenches Granolah's arm behind his back, pinning the broken bone and allowing Bardock to wrap his remaining arm around his enemy in a chokehold.
Sorry, you're way stronger than me, so the only way I can send you to meet her is underhandedly.
As Granolah quickly begins to turn purple, flailing with his one operable hand to try and pry the arm off, the warband and particularly Moro cry out for him to stay calm and focus. If he loses his head, he's as good as dead already. Something in this advice twinges in Granolah's brain, making him think on what Bardock has revealed, and of Jocko, and how sacrifice is sometimes needed to achieve victory. And so, defying his every natural instinct, the Cerulean pulls his hand away from Bardock's arm, and instead points it at his own injured one. With a muffled scream, Granolah fires another blast, this time small and concentrated, which cuts cleanly through his own elbow, severing and cauterizing it, in an instant changing Bardock's grip from a 2-point pin to a less stable headlock. Having not expected something so reckless, the Saiyan, along with all the other spectators, are caught off guard, just long enough for Granolah to deliver an elbow to the ribs as he puts all his weight into dropping out of the chokehold and rolling away. Tossing the now useless arm aside, Bardock praises the bounty hunter.
Pretty gutsy, brat, but I don't think you thought that one through. That was your main weapon.
Wrong. If I've picked up anything from your kid and the others, it's how to be versatile and make the most of what I got.
He then lets out another roar of anguish as the flesh and bone around his elbow begin to flake and burn away as bright green ki erupts from the wound as a construct resembling a sniper rifle. Resting his head against the new weapon and closing one eye to create a scope using oatmeal, the green-haired warrior levels it at Bardock's head, telling him to say his prayers. Bardock bellows, priming his warrior spirit, but this is all he gets to do, as moments later Granolah lets off a single shot of ki far greater than any he'd ever managed before, as he is knocked into the air from his recoil, and the round eviscerates not only the entirety of Bardock's head this time, but also the majority of his upper body. With so much critical damage sustained all at once, the Revenant cannot regenerate, and so fades away into smoke. The only remnant of him being a red bandana similar to the one Kakarot once wore in honor of his fallen brother, which Granolah catches from the air and ties around his wounded arm. Here, cracks begin to form in Baby Boo's facade, as he snaps at Granolah to get off the field, telling Meares to replace him. Meares does so with stoic determination, his expression not changing when a tall, blue-skinned figure with a white pompadour and a staff steps up to challenge him. There is a striking resemblance between the man and Vados, though it seems that she is not his only family, as in a reverential tone, Meares calls him brother, before both take on an aura of flickering blue. At once, the two men seem to vanish, moving too fast for any but Kakarot and Baby Boo to see. There are a flurry of combat, yet each movement is so precise it is as if their bodies are acting on their own. The pair seem to be perfectly matched, with neither landing a single hit. However, Kakarot can tell that Meares is not going all out, and as their eyes meet, the Saiyan wordlessly asks why. Sighing deeply, Meares nods almost imperceptibly, as if accepting that this is not the time for restraint, even if it pains him to destroy his kin. Breathing in once more, Mirus begins to transform, his purple skin becoming a more vibrant and healthy shade of blue than his opponent, and his hair pure silver rather than his previous dull white. And when he opens his eyes, they as well are shining an otherworldly silver. In an instant, the gap between the brothers' power widens exponentially, as barely with a flick of his wrist, Mirus takes the staff from his elder. His next move is just as restrained, as with no flourish, he swings the staff horizontally, bisecting his brother and reducing him to smoke like the others. The battle now done, Mirus does not detransform, instead glowing as his patrolman uniform is replaced with a similar garb to Vados as he floats over to stand beside Tarble, the staff that seemingly should have dissolved staying clutched firmly in his hand just like Bardock's bandana. In a small voice, Tarble asks what just happened, and his fellow patroller sighs that for the sake of the universe, he has agreed to something he never wanted and taken his brother's place. It allowed him to win his fight, but for better or worse, he will be unable to aid them in battle any longer. Tarble asks why not, and with an almost sorrowful look, Mirus replies that with great power always comes a great price. Moro watches this development with great interest before making his way to the arena. His opponent is similar to Mirus's in that they bear no sensible ki, looking like an emaciated version of Champa. Grinning hungrily, Moro addresses the cat as Lord Beerus before welcoming him to try his dreaded Hakai upon him. Kakarot is unfamiliar with this term, but it seems that Mirus knows, as he warns Moro not to be so reckless. While Baby Boo, seeing the opportunity to actually enjoy his game again, grins that Beerus should give the old goat what he asked for. The fallen god, seemingly also robbed of all personality by the necromancer, obeys, laying a hand upon Moro's chest and declaring,
Hakai.
Purple light flashes, but as Moro inhales deeply, the light seems to flicker and dissipate, finally being reduced to nothing.
Quite a delightful snack. Nearly as good as the master chef's. But sadly, this is a cheap imitation of what the true god of destruction was capable of. Still, I suppose I've become spoiled. So here, you may have this back.
He then manifests that same purple energy in his palm, and with a braying, maniacal laugh, thrusts it back at Beerus' chest, destroying him so thoroughly that he does not even have a chance to turn to smoke like the other revenants. Looking up at Baby Boo, Moro taunts him as pitiful.
However, I will give you marks for a good attempt, since next to the rotten key you've been forcing down my throat, this was satisfactory.
He then smugly floats back to his place in the stands, as Hit, the last member of their warband, aside from Kakarot, takes the field. To the surprise of everyone, his opponent who steps from the swirling black smoke is King Cold in all his monstrous glory.
You must be Babbity's creation. I thank you for returning me to the living world. With my new undying body, my reign will be.
But no one ever learns what Cold's reign is going to be, as at that very moment, Hit time skips over, ending up behind the tyrant who now sports a hole where his heart used to reside, causing Cold to suddenly collapse forward as the assassin drops it in front of him, thoroughly unimpressed. As Cold fades away and Hit jumps back to his place in the stands, Baby Boo howls in petulant fury, refusing to believe how easily these last few fights have gone for the warband. Chuckling slightly, Kakarot asks if it's his turn, and with no hint of his previous jovialty, Baby Boo hisses at him to get down there already, as he seems to visually put more effort into this next summoning of the undead. Silently complying in order to finally get some action for himself, the Saiyan zooms to the battlefield, morbidly looking forward to getting this sick game over with. Unlike the others, Kakarot does not get one opponent, he gets 5. Raditz, Nappa, Paragus, Beats, and finally, Broly step from the inky smoke and stand soullessly in front of him. Despite the callousness that he had formed over his heart after everything that he's lost, the sight of them, his family, almost breaks Kakarot. Each of them is someone he had loved, and to see them defiled like this, used as toys, makes the Saiyan's blood boil. Once again, he resolves to make Baby Boo pay for this and everything else, but first, he must destroy these shades so that his family can rest easy once more. Solemnly, the mutated Saiyan aggressively flares his ki in an explosive wave. So powerful, yet infused with an unfathomable respect and compassion, so that as his brethren make contact with it, they are instantly and painlessly reduced back to nothingness, leaving Kakarot all alone once again. Unfortunately, things can never be easy for this tragic hero, as Broly is able to avoid this thanks to his incredible battle instincts. Mourning that he cannot end him mercifully, Kakarot squares up to face his beloved brother in honorable combat. As the Saiyans lunge at each other, their fists collide with a shockwave strong enough to create cracks in the foundation of the Colosseum. Broly proves himself to still be quicker on the uptake, getting his next strike off first as he throws a roundhouse kick at Kakarot's head. Kakarot blocks the worst of it with his arm. This just leaves his body open for a punch that knocks the wind out of him. Broly then drives an elbow into Kakarot's skull before kneeing him in the chin as he goes down. Landing on his hands and knees, the younger Saiyan gasps in pain, rolling out of the way as Broly angrily stomps in an attempt to squish his head. When he finally stops, Kakarot finds himself looking directly up at the box where Baby Boo is clapping his hands and squealing with delight, clearly reveling in this anguish more than he has any other. This fills the Saiyan with a fury the likes of which he has never felt before, and as he clambers to his feet, faint green flecks shine in his aura. As he flares it with a primal scream much like Broly's, Kakarot throws himself at his brother now, forgetting strategy, forgetting his mission, forgetting his own name even. All he knows in that moment is to attack and keep attacking until the battle is won. And now, it is Broly's turn to go on the defensive, but it quickly becomes apparent that his defenses are no match for Kakarot's rage-driven offense, as he continually breaks through Broly's guard, snapping bones and drawing blood with each blow. As Broly staggers back, Kakarot goes in for the killing shot, ramming his fist cleanly through Broly's chest. As his first friend slumps forwards against him, Kakarot's rage subsides, and it is only now that he realizes what he has done. Frantically, he cries out his brother's name, pleading that he's sorry for losing control again, but instead of reproach, Broly smiles at him. Placing a hand behind Kakarot's head, Broly lowers his forehead so that he and his little brothers can touch. And in that moment, it is clear to the younger sibling that the older spirit has not been consumed by this plague, but instead lives on in him and his righteous fury. After this expression of feelings beyond words, Broly fades away into smoke, leaving only Kakarot to glare up at Baby Boo.
Now, I'm really mad!
And the battle between Kakarot and Baby Boo is one of speed and ferocity, but it is quickly solidified that even with the consumed power of so many powerful or weak, Kakarot's righteous fury burns far hotter and brighter, made most clear as the two powerhouses clash in the middle of the Coliseum of Death, with constructs of their energy manifesting as the hands of the Grim Reaper and the Uzaru themselves, destroying much of the arena in the process, until finally Kakarot gets a hold of the plague. In the face of such hate and raw power, Baby Boo turns pale, as Kakarot's ki suddenly eclipses his own, to the point that trying to sense and comprehend all of it causes a splitting headache. Gone is the laughing and leering demon, and in his place is a terrified wretch. Showing himself to be completely bereft of honor or dignity, Baby Boo attempts to flee, but Kakarot stops him by appearing next to him faster than he can perceive, grabbing the cowardly plague by the back of his head and ruthlessly dragging him face first down to the pit of death he created. As Kakarot's weight slams on top of him, the creature's mind nearly breaks due to the overwhelming fear simply due to the quiet and calm tone its executioner uses.
I can see the future too, and you had it backwards!
However, Baby Boo isn't out of tricks yet, and so raising a hand, summons his horde into the arena, ordering them to pull Kakarot off him so he can make his escape. At this point, Kakarot's warband leap in to help, but is hardly needed, as the thought of Baby Boo going unpunished for all his evils is more than Kakarot can take. Feeling as if the Hand of Death himself has suddenly chosen Kakarot as his avatar over their demonic opponent, Tarbo tells them all to stay back and watch. And as that wave of thralls made up of 2/3 of Universe 7's fallen bears down on him like a solid beam attack, the Saiyan stands tall, while pinning his prey down with a foot. Kakarot's green-tinged aura flares to life once again as he assumes a stance handed down to him by his teacher Nappa, before retaliating with a powerful beam of his own.
Gyoza Gun!
As it connects, the horde's numbers are quickly reduced, but as part of a hive mind, the thralls are wise to avoid the brunt and continue on. However, as the second stage of the attack activates and triples its size, all under the plague's influence are finally laid to rest, making Baby Boo the one who is alone, as Kakarot turns his attention back towards him. Like a coward, the demon pleads for mercy he never once showed to another being, but Kakarot has none left to give, and so instead it deals a single decisive blow to interrupt the monstrosity, empowering it with all his ki so that when it makes contact, every single atom of Baby Boo is disintegrated in an instant, as the dying planet shudders, thus finally ending this nightmare. The warband then converges on each other, smiles on each of their faces as they realize the magnitude of what they've accomplished today, even if there were heavy losses along the way. For one glorious instant, these 6 warriors are the saviors of this universe. But as the moment fades, unpleasant questions begin to form in their minds. Ever the pragmatist, Kakarot is the one to vocalize them, asking what is to become of him and Moro as death row inmates now. Tarbo seems to think about this for a moment, weighing his options before a sly smile crosses his lips.
The way my report will reflect things, Prisoner 5986 instant transmissioned away shortly after killing Baby Boo. Real shame, too, since it's pretty much impossible to track someone once they've teleported. Is that so? Of course, the Galactic Patrol will still want to hunt you down, but at least for now you've earned the right to live as a free man.
Smiling in earnest now, Kakarot thanks his fellow Saiyan, and the two shake hands before Kakarot surprisingly pulls the younger Saiyan in for a quick hug.
I'm proud of you, little brother. Now, who'd like to go get into trouble with me? As if I'm about to give up my master chef for prison food again. I'll tag along as well, as long as you don't mind a sniper without his shooting hand. Happy to have you both. See ya, heroes.
Then, as each lay a hand on his shoulder, the trio teleport away. This leaves just Mirrors, Hit, and Tarple, who now must decide where they will go from here. Hit's path is of course the clearest, as he says he will be returned to Universe 6, before adding that if they would like, they'd be welcome to come along. A familiar voice then cuts the assassin off, saying that it would be unwise to invite interlopers into their universe without his god's permission. Humbly, Hit apologizes as Champa and Vados appear, accompanied by Kibito, with Vados saying that in either case it doesn't really matter, since such a trip will have to wait. Looking up at her, Tarple asks why, and with a coy smile, she tells the Saiyan that before anything, the Omni King would like to see both him and Mirrors. It seems that Baby Boo's actions have left this universe without a god of destruction and an angel to look after it, and in light of their recent service, Lord Zeno would like to offer them the positions. After the proper training, of course. Grumbling to himself, Champa says that the idea sounds preposterous to him. After all, what sort of name is Zabel for a god?
Actually, it's Tarble.
Smiling, he and Mirrors each take Vados' hand, ready to take on the next greater responsibility.
Well, that does it, friends, at least for now. I'm genuinely curious, anxious, and excited to see and hear how you guys enjoyed this one in comparison to the rest of the series as an ending and compared to my other Dragon Ball stories. I had a lot I wanted to accomplish in this final part, and most of it just couldn't be fit in during a reasonable time frame, as well as the fact that I knew I wanted to end the story proper in this part. Or at the very least, the last 4 times I've said this will be the final part of the story. And aside from time, we also had certain constraints like my budget. Point is, I did my best to fit in the most vital plot points to the story, while some, unfortunately minor in comparison, plot beats were skipped. Like, for example, there was meant to be an entire extended Zabel/Tarble flashback that would expand on the implication Baby Boo made about he and Zarbon being a couple, for those of you who actually caught that. And before you guys start asking me to continue the story, I will say I am not 100% turned off to return to this timeline for more adventures after the full story has been released. But it'll probably only be under 2 conditions, one of which will certainly be met, and that is number 1, we get more content from Super to adapt, and the number 2 is a certain threshold of popularity has to be reached. Let's say, just for a throwout number, if the full story for this series ends up beating out the views on What If Goku Was Sent to Planet Namek's full story is kind of progenitor series, then at some point we'll return where there may be a season 2 or a book 2 or whatever you want to call it. However, right now we're in the present and we do need to get out of here because this video is very long. And speaking of budget constraints, please consider joining the ranks of these wonderful people known as the patrons in order to aid me against those. Crimson Manifesto, DJ the Lazy Gamer, Dominique, Knuckles OX, Pizza 15X, Aaron Winters, Narku, Normandy 1998, Jay Ray, Omar Cousin, Shannon Roberts, Stephen Norton, Anthony Canales, Daniel Smith, Inebriated, Infernate Beast 326, Jamal Hayden, Kevin, PJ9D III, Safe Serendipity, Samuel Viveros, Vegito Gaming 78, and Zach Haji. As always, thank you guys so much for directly and most effectively supporting the channel. But that's gonna do it, you guys. So as always, be sure to take care of yourselves and the world around you, and to go beyond plus ultra. And I'll see you guys next time.